A humble farmer walks into the study of one of the most respected scholars in America, carrying a slip of paper covered in strange, ancient looking symbols. He claims they were copied from gold plates delivered by an angel. The scholar examines it, gives his verdict, and sends the farmer on his way. What happens in that room becomes one of the most debated moments in Mormon history, and the story only gets stranger from there. Tonight, we're not just going to tell the story of a document, we're digging into a linguistic illusion, a prophetic claim, and a credibility play that helped launch a religion. Was it a revelation or was it manipulation? Next on Mormonism Live. Mr. Radio Free Mormon, how are you doing this fine evening?
I'm doing great tonight. Bill, how are you?
I'm doing so good. Life is good.
That was a great cold open you just
Look
did.
at that. Yeah,
I was enthralled.
You should have been, my friend. It's going to be a great episode tonight. Anything you want to add to the front end here before we dive into it?
We have got what may end up being somewhat of a long episode, but I've got to tell everybody that first off, and I don't want to steal your thunder, which is
Please.
Okay. It's just that this show got started on last week's show. A week ago, we were doing the what were we doing a week ago? It was something very important.
The Adam Clarke commentary.
The Adam Clarke commentary. That was a test. I was just seeing if you remembered.
I did.
And I brought up this idea about what we'll be covering tonight, sort of as an incidental thing to what we were talking about last week. And you got very excited by that. And you went out and you went crazy and you started digging through the stacks and doing all kinds of research and putting things together. And that's what you're going to share with us tonight. And then I did the same thing. And I came up with a few things as well, which are actually different from your thing. But this is the wonderful thing about talking together. And sometimes I listen to podcasts. Sometimes I'm on podcasts. Sometimes I'm having a private conversation or public. And an idea will come to me. It will be generated from the conversation, an idea that would not have come to me otherwise. And I don't know exactly how it happens, but I know the end is sometimes good, sometimes not so good, but sometimes the end result is good. And I don't know how it happened, but I'm pretty darn sure it would not have happened except for having that conversation that sparked it.
Yeah, it was definitely last week's episode, and something said in there that connected to, I think it was directly said about Charles Anthon, and we just wondered if sort of there was a connection to the Adam Clarke commentary. And so we'll go into that in detail tonight. Not only will we talk about that, we'll just lay out this entire affair so that you can understand the chronology, how things happened. And I think there'll be lots of moments where you get to sort of see these events from a different lens. I'm going to put the slideshow up on the screen. And I just want to note here on the first one, I'm going to say this. As you settle in for this episode, we'd like to invite you to listen through the eyes of a skeptic, not a cynic, but someone willing to question, to probe, to wonder whether things really played out the way the official story claims. Ask yourself, what would this moment look like if Joseph Smith wasn't inspired, but intentional about what he was doing? What if this episode makes more sense, not less, when viewed as a calculated move rather than a miraculous one? And hold that perspective in your back pocket as we walk through the story. And by the end, you might find what seemed like prophecy starts to look a lot more like strategy. Let's get into it. So I'll start off here with the first one. And if you and I can sort of switch every other one, and we'll see where we get to. I know later on we've got a segment where you've got several things that you pulled together, and I think they add a lot of value to the show too. And I think folks will walk away tonight with such a significant amount of clarity around this event. Because, you and I, both converts to Mormonism, we both, we took the missionary discussions. We both were really excited to learn about this religion, and we both loved learning about it. And this is one of the first stories you get in that first 6 months in the church or when you're investigating the church. And it really sounds marvelous, right? Joseph Smith sends with Martin Harris a document. We'll get into it here in a moment. And he goes and sees the experts of the day And they tell Martin Harris, they verify for him that what he brought is something ancient. And Martin comes back and literally mortgages the farm. So, so we'll jump into it.
He doesn't buy the farm. He
What's that?
mortgages the farm.
He mortgages the farm.
Yes. And this was something, by the way, that bothered me not long before I went on my mission. So I must have been, I don't know, dipping into the anti-Mormon literature out behind the woodshed. But I had become aware of Charles Anthon's version or versions. And that could have only been through, anti-Mormon literature. You sure as hell not going to hear that at church, right? So I was concerned and it bothered me, but then it did occur to me, and it was probably argued to me, because it's what's always argued. Okay, we got a contradiction about what happened, but what does Martin Harris do? He leaves, he goes back, and he mortgages his farm to the tune of what would be around over $100,000 today to subsidize the publishing of this book. And the natural inference is, well, something impressed him.
Yeah, and I think by the time we get done tonight, you'll understand what likely happened and why Martin Harris was impressed. So, with that, let's jump into it. I want to set the stage first. Joseph Smith, Martin Harris, and a slip of strange characters. And I tried to put images up. I'll be very clear as we go through this what these images stand for. RFM, if on the slides you're reading, if you want to make those images clear, by all means. And I think we both intimately understand this story. And so hopefully, folks, this will be a lot of fun for you. In the late 1820s, a young Joseph Smith claimed to have unearthed an ancient record inscribed on golden plates, which he was translating into what would become the Book of Mormon. Lacking formal education or scholarly credibility, Joseph leaned on the faith and funds of early followers. One such follower was Martin Harris, we all know, one of the three witnesses. A respectable middle-aged farmer. This is an image of him later in life, also colorized. The original was not. Middle-aged farmer intrigued by Joseph's project. Harris was inclined to believe Joseph, but also wanted reassurance that the golden plates and their bizarre engravings were genuine.
In February 1828, Joseph copied several lines of the strange characters from the gold plates onto a piece of paper. This paper, later known as the Anthon Transcript, was essentially a sample of the plate's writing, a mishmash of curious symbols unlike anything the local farmers had ever seen. Joseph handed this precious slip to Martin Harris, hoping that an educated expert could verify the characters and the translation so far.
Yeah, and I want to just note here on the screen, the document on the left, anyone who's been in Mormonism for any amount of time will recognize that document. It is often confused as being the Anthon Transcript. I remember at various points in my time in the church that such was referred to as the Anthon Transcript. And so lots of folks in the church, especially in years past, thought that this was the document that Martin Harris took to Charles Anthon. It was not. It is something more similar to the thing on the right. And I'll just note the thing on the right is Mark Hoffman's forgery. I think I might have Hoffman spelled wrong. Sorry about that.
That's how they knew it was a forgery.
Yeah, yeah. But this is Hoffman's forgery of the Anthon Transcript. And what Hoffman did was he took what Martin Harris said and what Charles Anthon said, and he created a document that would match their description so that it would fool people. Hoffman was famous for that. He would always take a grain of truth, a nugget of truth, and then wrap something around that in order to scam or deceive people with his fraudulent documents. So it would have looked something like that, but that's not it. So all through the show, when you see that document, just know that's the Hoffman forgery. That's not the actual Anthon Transcript, which does not exist. We do not have it. We have no idea what happened to it or where it is.
So, Bill, let me ask you this, and I apologize for asking a question I don't know the answer to. Is this document over here on the right, the forgery, okay, by Hoffman, which I am pretty sure is one F, two N's, is this the document that the first presidency, including Spencer W. Kimball, was looking at with the magnifying glass in the photo from the early 1980s?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. I know that we've got like Tim Rathbone in the audience. I haven't seen Dan Vogel comment yet, but if Dan's in the audience, he can certainly answer that. And if anybody else knows the answer, please by all means. I don't. I know that a lot of the buzz in that historical moment was around the salamander letter, but I don't know what was on the desk that Boyd K. Packer and Gordon.
Well, that was a
Hinckley.
transcript. It was an Anthon transcript.
Well, this
I
would have
just
been
don't
it.
know if this is it.
This has got to be it then.
I
This
bet it
is
is.
the forgery.
Because you can't see it. You just see, the big wigs huddled around it.
Yeah. This has got to be it. And you can see why that one would be a perfect one to get a good media photo of, because this is an actual fate. They don't mind this one being in the news if this had turned out to be real. This was a story that they used to sort of say the church is true. And as long as the symbols aren't from any language, then they'll have no problem figuring it out, or not be able to figure it out. So then it would sort of prove that this is an untranslatable language. All right, I'll go from there. This description of the Anthon transcript, and then there's a bigger image of it on the right there, the Hoffman forgery. And we'll get into the story where this is repeated, but I just want folks to start to get a feel for this. The document was a curious mix. Yeah, please.
I'm so sorry. I just want to tell you this.
Yeah.
Down in the bottom right, it says Ensign July 1980, page 2. So this was when they did not know it was a forgery. This is when they thought it was the real thing. And it was published in the Ensign. July 1980 is the date.
Yeah. So this was in correlated material thought to be legitimate. Everyone thought at the time that Mark Hoffman was the real deal, and then things started to fall apart. So this is the description that if you take Harris and Anthon and the things they said, this is what was said about that. And most of this comes from Charles Anthon. Martin Harris doesn't really describe the document very much, but at least gives us a little bit. The document was a curious mix of characters arranged in vertical columns, some resembling Greek and Hebrew letters, others appearing as Roman characters turned sideways or upside down, mixed in decorative symbols like stars, half moons, and other unfamiliar markings. It ended with a rough sketch of a circular figure divided into compartments reminiscent of an ancient zodiac or calendar imagery. The overall impression was that of a hodgepodge, an imitation of various ancient scripts strung together without any coherent system or meaning. That's what Charles Anthon described it as. So there's that.
Very good. You're probably stopping, aren't you, and waiting for me to start reading?
Always.
I will do that. What I was doing right here was I was going to the July 1980 Ensign on the church's website to see if it's there. But anyway.
Please do. What page did it say?
That doesn't appear to be
2.
on page 2, if that's really correct. And we've got the Great Commandments. That's the first that's the first presidency message. Nothing usually goes before the first presidency message. I don't know. But anyway, you see, they have it so you can't like thumb through it here. You have to.
Oh, RFM. Let me show you something. So
it's all been digitized. What is there's something to be seen? What?
I wonder if the church. Let me present my screen. Oops. Let me get out of that. Present screen. Share screen. Here it comes. So I gotta take this one off. Put that one on.
Yeah,
so when you can go to the church's website, but there's also, if you look things up like this, often you'll find Archive Viewer, which is a great website that actually has the original document.
Oh my
if
gosh,
I go to the
really?
1980, look what page 2 is.
It's right there.
It is. Let me see if I can make this bigger.
Okay, so that citation was correct. It's always nice to find one
There
that is. And what is said around it? That's definitely it. And you can zoom right in and
so there it is. So what I'm wondering is, because you went to the church's website, correct?
Yes.
The church has since removed it.
Well, what can you show me what's on page 3?
Yeah, page 3 is what's in the magazine.
Okay, first presidency message is the first thing, but that says it's on page 2. Yeah,
this would have been the inside cover.
Oh, so that's what you mean. So 1 on this is the outside cover, 2 is the inside cover. What does it say about it? It's got to say something above or below or on the facing page.
It doesn't say anything.
So on the facing page,
we go right to that.
There's got to be something there that talks about that crazy picture they just published.
Here. we'll take our time, folks. We'll just kind of double check this.
Like way down there in that on the bottom left, italics, little print.
Bottom left. Let's see.
Yeah, right there.
Inside front cover. Here we go. A photograph of what is believed to be the characters from the gold plates copied by Joseph Smith in 1828. So there it is. See News of the Church for this issue. Now, this wasn't part of what we planned to do. This was something we just sort of did at the last minute. So I'm going to just go back here, page 69. Let's see what that says. This may not be, that's page 67, 68, 69. All right, News of the Church. A page from the Bible presumed to have been owned by Samuel Smith. That page of the Bible apparently was missing. Samuel Smith recopied it by hand, signed it, and inserted it below the title page from the Samuel Smith Bible. And then you've got this, a look at the newly discovered Joseph Smith manuscript. Documents are the backbone of history. An historian's dream of finding a document that will turn a question mark into a certainty. Anyone who's unearthed an old letter from a grandmother or a long-lost relative's diary will understand the excitement I felt on September 17th of April, 1980, when Mark Hoffman came into my office with a folded sheet and showed me a paragraph signed Joseph Smith. Several weeks earlier, Mark, a collector of Mormonism, had purchased a 1668 Cambridge edition of the King James Bible. See his story, page 73. So now we can go find that. The previous owner said he had purchased it from a member of the Smith family. The signatures in it could have gone back as early as the 17th century, and that Bible had been a single sheet of paper. Could it be a copy of the characters Joseph Smith had copied from the gold plates and given to Martin Harris to take to New York in February 1828? I had to agree that the paper which lay before me, discolored by time and by chemical reaction with the pages of the Bible, certainly looked. I'll have to go back up to the top here. That's strange. They don't. So they're showing more pictures. And I don't really want to read this whole thing, do you? I mean, I'm happy to if you think this is an important thing to do.
Not at all.
But I'll just finish this paragraph. Document, finding the original would be too much to hope for, but this might be a copy of the original. Heretofore, the only extant copy of these characters has been the Whitmer manuscript, which we'll talk about, which was the other image that we were talking about that's more commonly known. Whitmer manuscript, a document David Whitmer owned and thought was the original. His heirs gave it to the RLDS Church in 1903, and it is currently in their archive. So the ensign in 1980, the church was in awe, thinking that it was highly likely that this was the original Charles Anthon manuscript.
Yeah, it matched his description, Charles Anton's description.
Yep. All right, let me go back here. We are on that one there.
I've gotten behind on my reading chores. I apologize.
No problem. I'm glad we took a little sidetrack.
Martin Harris, took it upon himself to seek out the learned. His journey led him to New York City, into the office of Professor Charles Anton, a renowned classical scholar at Columbia College. One can easily imagine the scene, the humble, eager farmer presenting a scrap of parchment covered in odd characters to the skeptical professor and saying, "May I have more, please?" This meeting would become a pivotal moment in early Mormonism, bridging frontier faith and academic scrutiny. Little did they know, their brief encounter would birth two irreconcilable versions of what happened that day. One told by Martin Harris and embraced by the fledgling Latter-day Saint movement, and another later recounted by Charles Anton himself. The truth sits shrouded in history, but the episode's impact on Mormon credibility would be profound.
Yeah, and just note Charles Anton there on the left. And by the way, there's so many little tangents here. I thought it was important to sort of get a bit of like a script up on the screen so that we could read that, not focus on the historical telling of the event, but focus on sort of the side details that come into view as we examine this history. So you got Charles Anton on the left. That's a photograph of him. Once again, the Hoffman forgery. So you can sort of picture what Martin Harris is bringing in. Now, I think this is one of the most important moments in the show. I think there's going to be 5 or 6 of them today. I think this is one of them. And I just want to note, we're not going to go into great detail about what Martin Harris says. I just want to note one main point, but it's divided into two, which is that we all got this story. And in our minds, the way the story's told and the way we perceived it is Martin Harris goes to Charles Anthon with the characters of the Book of Mormon, and Charles Anthon verifies that those are in fact real characters. And we'll get into this because there's some confusion, but if there's a translation attached, that the translation is the real deal. And I just want to note Martin Harris's version of the story, and it's actually Joseph Smith's version. We'll get into that because we never get Martin Harris telling us this. We get Joseph Smith saying that Martin Harris' account is this story. And so then we proceed to read in Joseph Smith's history, Martin Harris's account. But the only reason we have it is because Joseph Smith inserted it. Whether there's an actual written account, whether Joseph is just pulling this out of memory, whether he's making it up, we don't know. But this is secondhand through Joseph Smith.
Yeah. What we do know is that Martin Harris had been excommunicated the year before this.
Yeah. And the important detail here is that when you look at this and you read it with a little more skepticism, you'll notice that Martin Harris took 2 documents to Charles Anthon. Joseph Smith sets up the story, creating in part how we interpret Martin Harris's telling. Again, if in fact it is Martin Harris's telling, and I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt and trust that it is. He says, Mr. Martin Harris came to our place, got the characters which I had drawn off the plates, and started with them to the city of New York for what took place relative to him and the characters. I refer to his own account of the circumstances as he related them to me after his return, which was as follows. Now,
there is no account. There's no written account. He's saying, I'm remembering what he told me from 10 years ago. This is 1838. And that's what I meant when I said that Martin Harris is not present when Joseph Smith is creating this part of the history in 1838, because he had been excommunicated in Ohio in 1837 before Joseph Smith had to run and head to Missouri, which is where he's having this written or scribing it out. So that Martin Harris isn't there. And can I just say one other thing here before I forget about it?
Please.
The 2 documents, I think, is fatal to this whole thing. When you are a magician, there's always, almost always, there's going to be a gimmick, okay? And the gimmick is the thing that the audience is not supposed to see. A gimmick is something that looks extraneous to the trick, and it looks curious and out of place. And if an audience sees the gimmick, then they know that the trick has got to have to do with that thing, right? If I'm doing a trick, it doesn't have anything to do with this, but yet I'm doing this while I'm doing the trick. Yeah, it probably has something to do with the can. So what Joseph Smith has is a completely irrelevant and otherwise useless document that has just characters written on it. If one document has the characters and the translation, you don't need another document that has characters.
Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, does it? I just want to thank Diamond Dave. He says
Hey,
the Reformed
Diamond.
Egyptian says, click like, subscribe, and click the bell notification button. Thank you, Diamond Dave, for that. Yes, Joseph Smith sends with Martin Harris 2 different documents. In verse 64 of Joseph Smith's history, he says, I went to the city of New York. This is Martin Harris, allegedly. I went to the city of New York and presented the characters which had been translated with the translation thereof to Professor Charles Anthon, a gentleman celebrated for his literary attainments. Professor Anthon stated that the translation was correct, more so than any he had seen before translated from the Egyptian. I then showed him those which were not yet translated. And he said they were Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic. And he said they were true characters. He gave me a certificate certifying to the people of Palmyra that they were true characters. He gave me a certificate certifying to the people of Palmyra that they were true characters, and that the translation of such of them as had been translated was also correct. So Harris is claiming that Charles Anthon received two different documents, one with a translation, one without, that he verified the one that was just characters as being true characters, and he verified the other as being a real translation.
Yeah, the only other thing is they could have been on the same piece of paper, but in that bottom part where it says, I then showed him those which were not translated, how does that happen if they're on the same piece of paper?
Right.
Yeah,
He's got two things.
I think
And as
you're
you
right.
point out, the magic trick is often you're manipulated into looking at one thing while something else is being done, or something else is taken out of your view and you're distracted with something else.
I think we can all recognize that copying down some characters that happen to be actual, ancient, and authentic is a different thing entirely from writing those same characters down and giving the translation if you have no means to do that.
Yeah. And Dan is saying there never was a translation. And I'll just note, even if there was, it's the same problem is going to happen. And we're going to get to all of that here shortly. So
Yeah, and I think that what we're saying is that what we think is, and I think Dan agrees, is that he sent him some characters, and then they were recognized, and then a very gullible Martin Harris takes that as authenticating, excuse me, authenticating the Book of Mormon, and goes back and he's ready to mortgage his farm.
yeah. All right. According to Martin Harris's account, as later recorded by Joseph Smith, again, allegedly Martin Harris, I said, that's right. We don't have the story directly from Harris. Rather, we have it from Smith, who's claimed to be simply copying over Harris's account.
And apparently not even that, huh?
Yeah,
And
no.
not even that. He's not copying over Harris's account.
And when I say that, I mean either verbal or written, although the language of what Joseph Smith said indicates he's pulling it out of memory.
Yeah.
Years later, memory's a little tricky. The meeting with Professor Anthon was nothing short of remarkable, Harris said, according to Smith, that when Anthon examined the strange characters in Joseph's translation of them, the professor was impressed. Anthon purportedly affirmed that the translation of Egyptian was correct, more so than he had before seen translated from Egyptian. RFM, how much Egyptian do we think has been translated at this point in the Americas that anyone could possibly know?
I think very little. There may have been, I don't know, some, because I understand that the Rosetta Stone that discovered at the end of the 1700s was finally cracked by Champollion. What was it, 1822?
1822.
So there's still some time. And that word travels fast. Everybody's crazy about Egypt. I'm having a tough night. Egyptological stuff. I need to restrict myself to words with one syllable. Okay. So yeah, there's time for this to come over. And Charles Anthon is not going to know Egyptian. He did not say what Martin Harris said he said. He would not have. He could not have said it unless he's trying to say, I don't know very much. Nobody knows very much. I might know, a little bit. This is as good as anything I've seen. Something like that, which then gets twisted around. But there's no way he said it the way Martin Harris has him saying it, because he would have had to have been lying to do that. And there is no reason whatsoever to think he would have been lying.
And there are at least two reasons to believe that this is a fabricated portion of the story. And we'll get to those in just a moment.
Okay. Encouraged, Martin Harris then showed Charles Anthon additional characters, ones Joseph had not yet translated. At this, Anthon allegedly identified the script. And now we're going to Anthon's account. Anthon allegedly identified this. No. This is the faithful history. Mm-hmm. This is the crazy thing about it. This is actually in the Pearl of Great Price. Things were very fluid at this time. There is not a set in stone story about what these characters are and whether people can read them academically without the help of God. And that's why there's this back and forth, like shifting tectonic plates in this story all over, right? Because in the official history that Joseph Smith writes down, he has Anthon telling Martin Harris that these characters are a mixture of Egyptian Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic. Okay, the Egyptian I get, but what the hell is Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic doing on the gold plates, which the gold plates themselves tell us are Egyptian, though a reformed kind of Egyptian?
These other three languages don't have anything to do with Egyptian. You and I were talking on the phone. I was looking this up as we were prepared for the episode. Those languages, as you said, and as my research verified, are their own languages completely. The Egyptian language is completely separate from these other three. And the only apologetic workaround, by the way, and I hope they don't use it because this would be ridiculous, is that Reformed Egyptian is a conglomeration of handfuls of languages. I mean, you couldn't make it any harder on yourself if you said, "Look, we're going to just create a new language here while we're making the trek southward to Nahum, and then we're going to go due east to Bountiful, and on the way there, we're going to come up with a language, and what we're going to do is we're going to take these four languages, combine them into something coherent, create symbols that represent long paragraphs of text, and that way no one will know what the hell we're doing."
But that's not how they did it. They did it over the course of hundreds and hundreds of years while they were in the Americas, far away from those other languages.
Huh. All right. I'll step aside.
Was I reading? Oh, yeah.
You were.
If Joseph Smith had access to actual symbols and characters from other languages, this would support this response from Anthon and make sense. So if Joseph Smith has something, some book or something, right?
Yeah.
That he can find some characters from ancient languages and copy them down. That would be enough to qualify or meet this part of the story, right?
Yeah.
In other words, the learned professor supposedly recognized elements of several ancient languages on Joseph's paper that was sent with Harris. Martin Harris went on to claim that Anthon provided a letter certifying the character's authenticity and the accuracy of Joseph's translation. This makes sense. Anthon would have recognized what Smith or Harris note as Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic. I would say the first part of that would make sense. In other words, that the characters are authentic, but the accuracy of Joseph's translation still would not make sense.
Yeah.
At least not at this point.
You're 100% right.
Okay, does it need to be these exact languages, or might Martin Harris or Joseph Smith's lack of expertise have them simply rehashing the names of some ancient languages?
In other words, the languages that are in the Adam Clarke commentary, there's multiple symbols of multiple languages. I don't think they line up exactly with these four, but you can picture in the memory of the event being there, the then telling Joseph Smith, and then Joseph Smith coming back and writing down what he remembers Harris saying. It seems like it would be pretty easy to name some languages, some ancient languages. Think you're naming the ones that Charles Anthon stated, but by playing the telephone game, maybe they're not exact.
Yeah, and out there in the audience, how many of you, I know pretty much all of you who are ever a member of the church read through this. This is part of the Joseph Smith story, and we talk about it a lot in church. It's a faith-inspiring story. But how many of you have read through this and just blown by it and not even think, what are these characters, what are these foreign languages doing on the gold plates? There's nothing in the Book of Mormon narrative that would prepare us to expect that these would be on the gold plates, especially when the Book of Mormon itself tells us that it's written in Egyptian. Remember, the majority of the Book of Mormon, from Mosiah to the end, is portrayed as being an amalgamation. What's the word they use?
Reformed.
No. Just compression, amalgamation. It's what Mormon's doing to all the plates.
Oh, it's he's
I feel like I'm playing.
abridging.
Thank you too. Yes.
Abridging.
Sounds like abridging the gold plates. So he's abridging the gold plates, right? And so why are all these characters on the gold plates? I don't know. They shouldn't be there. According to Mormonism, they shouldn't be there. According to the Book of Mormon, they shouldn't be there. So why is the Pearl of Great Price saying they were there?
Yeah. Unless whatever Joseph Smith had Harris take to Charles Anthon actually wasn't Reformed Egyptian at all, but instead was symbols of other languages that Joseph Smith some way might have had access to.
Yeah. But Joseph
Yeah.
Smith, he was out there on the frontier. He's out there with Buffalo Bill. And there's no way he had access to any of these ancient kind of languages, Bill.
Yeah. Well, so Martin pocketed this written validation, a golden ticket of sorts, affirming that a bona fide scholar had found the Reformed Egyptian characters credible. Now, this is impossible, folks, as no expert can verify Reformed Egyptian. This is the most absurd thing. By the way, somebody asked, how could Charles Anthon recognize these other languages? And you pointed out that he was a professor of the classics.
He was a classical professor.
Yeah. Which would mean what, RFM?
Well, mainly Roman and Greek.
Yeah.
So you've got your Latin and your Greek as far as the languages go.
He would have been familiar with the symbols, letters, characters of ancient languages.
Yeah.
Because that was his profession. He was a college professor at a university teaching people about ancient literature. And he would have been familiar with the symbols.
Right.
So
And there's
that's
nothing
not
saying that he immediately identified them on sight or didn't open a book or two.
right. So Martin pocketed this written validation, a golden ticket of sorts, affirming a bona fide scholar had found the Reformed Egyptian characters credible. Again, this is impossible because Mormon 9:34 tells us that the Lord knoweth the things which we have written, and also that none other people knoweth our language. None other people. We're the only people who know this language. And because none other people knoweth our language, therefore he hath prepared a means for the interpretation thereof.
Right. That's why you got to have the interpreters. That's why
Yeah.
you got to have the rocks or the rock, plural or singular.
Yeah. And
So-
then, yeah, please.
Okay, I'm just going to say this is one of the problems with the Charles Anthon story, okay, is that within Mormon's own terms, in Mormonism's own terms, it makes no sense. It can't happen. All right. Here's why. The Book of Mormon says nobody can read these characters. Nobody can read these letters. Okay. Therefore, that would include Charles Anthon. Therefore, he wouldn't be sent there in the first place to try and decode them. And certainly he wouldn't say he recognizes some of them. It is impossible to happen within the context that Mormonism sets itself. But this is another aspect, I believe, where things are in flux. Remember the tectonic plates moving around and bumping into each other? I believe it doesn't start as Reformed Egyptian. The characters on the plates are just Egyptian. This is my theory, okay? That the story is the characters on the plates. They're Egyptian. But then something happens. Something happens where somebody wants to read them or test them. And therefore, they become Reformed Egyptian within the context of the Book of Mormon, the thing that you were talking about, Reformed Egyptian, because now there has to be a reason that nobody can read them. Okay? It's clear to me that Mormon or Moroni, whoever it is speaking there in Mormon chapter 9, who are they talking to? Everybody else is dead. There's no purpose in putting that at the end of the book, except as a message to the readers of the book that nobody can read this language, guys. So that's a thing that's in flux. I'm not going to go off on that, but we'll just continue, okay? Because then we get down to 1838 and the history that Joseph Smith is writing about what happened when he wasn't around with Martin Harris in New York. And now Joseph Smith goes overboard, I believe, in describing this in such miraculous and wonderful and incredible terms that he ends up contradicting what's in the Book of Mormon, that nobody can read it. Okay? That nobody can read it. Which was put there initially, I think, because somebody said they couldn't read it, and that somebody was probably Charles Anthon. And this was part of the scriptural excuse for why it was he couldn't read it. Because, hey, Martin, I told you this. Did you not hear me? It's Reformed Egyptian. It's not Egyptian. People can recognize Egyptian. This is Reformed Egyptian. Nobody knew. Over this 1,000-year period, they changed it. They changed it, and nobody knew what it was. So that covers that, right? That's pure speculation. But I do think that there's a reason that verse, Mormon 9:34, is in there. And it has nothing to do with what's going on in the context of the Book of Mormon, and everything to do with what's going on in the world surrounding the translation of the Book of Mormon.
And then the second point here is not only do we have the Book of Mormon telling you that no one can read this language that's called Reformed Egyptian, which is 2 verses earlier in Mormon 9:32 when they call it Reformed Egyptian, but also we have the Characters manuscript or the Characters document, and nobody can read it. Everybody sort of goes like, yeah, it looks like common characters of the day, sort of made a little more funny, turned sideways, made upside down. My point in the previous slide here was to say, if you go online, there are, at least in these 2 instances, the bottom right image and the image on the bottom left, there are 2 instances where people are claiming that they can translate the characters. But I was telling you and I were talking on the phone before the episode, and I just made a note that translating languages is a little like math. Now, there's a little more fluidity to it. But what I mean by that is that if you translate languages accurately, you can show your work. And these 2 people claim that they can translate this, but they don't have any ability to show their work. And anytime we put this document in front of people, the Characters document, this is what Peter Whitmer and David Whitmer claim was copied directly from the Characters of the gold plates, and yet nobody can figure out what the hell this says. So how the hell could Charles Anthon guess at it when he did? RFMI.
He could not. He absolutely could not. But you see, what did Mormon chapter 9 say? No one can read it. The Book of Mormon is right. No one can read this gobbledygook. So the Book of Mormon is true.
Yeah. So we have 2 instances where people try, they can't show their work. I know on the right, it sort of looks like they are, but they're just taking, they're taking, I think it's a hieroglyph of somewhere from Egyptian, and they're trying to say like, well, this one symbol looks similar to that, and this one symbol looks similar to that. But you have to be able to go, in other moments, these symbols were used in ways that clearly lay out the story of the Book of Mormon. And you have to show your work. You can't just put text with symbols and have it come across that way. So,
right.
If you want to say anything else, otherwise we can move on.
I just want to say this about, you know how sometimes when you get caught doing something or whatever, and you have to give a lie as an excuse, and then something happens further on down, and that lie isn't going to apply, and you have to come up with another lie. Okay, I think that we have the fingerprints of something like that going on in this story. And that has to do with Joseph Smith apparently has to come up with different reasons why it is that nobody can read the characters on these plates. And one of them has to do with being sealed. Okay. There's this huge part of it that's sealed so that at least that part cannot be read. That's the whole idea, right? And yet then we find in Mormon 9:34, nobody could read the damn things anyway. So why do you have to seal plates on which are written things in a language that nobody can read?
Not only that, RFM, an angel takes them back and has never returned them. They'll never get the chance to be seen by the experts of our modern day anyway.
Right. And so I'm making that observation in order to hopefully make this point or suggestion that it does seem like one of them, and I'm guessing the plates being sealed was the first one. That's why people can't read it. And then the second one is that ends up not working. And so now it has to be because nobody can read the characters. So it's one thing to notice this and just sort of, think, well, that's silly. That doesn't make any sense, But what I'm trying to do is hopefully take it a step beyond that and say, I think this means something. I think that what this means is there was a progression, likely, from one story to another. And the second story was the fallback when the first story didn't hold firm for what it is they needed it to.
Yeah, and part of it might be that people were copying down the characters, such as this characters document on the right-hand side and if there are characters in existence, Joseph Smith has to start thinking, well, what if somebody starts looking at these and going, this is just not a language? So to have a reason behind it on the front end that says, hey, none of you will be able to ever crack this code. It is an unreadable language except by the people who wrote it. Then stops in its tracks any effort to pursue trying to get the document translated.
Right. And remember, timing wise, Mormon and the Book of Mormon is being produced in April, May, June of 1829. All the stuff we're talking about with Martin Harris going to New York happens more than a year earlier in February of 1828.
Yeah. Yep.
So in 1828, of course it can be read. It can be translated. You just got to find somebody who's smart enough. But by 1829, nobody can read it.
Yeah. Why? Right. Why take it to an expert in 28 when a year later you're going to say nobody can read the thing in 29?
Because you didn't know that a year later you were going to be saying nobody can read it.
Yeah. All right. Your turn, my friend.
As Martin Harris was leaving, however, Professor Anthon inquired how Joseph Smith had obtained the plates. Martin explained that an angel of God had revealed the hiding place of the golden plates. At that answer, Anthon reportedly asked to see the certification he had just given. He then tore the letter to pieces, declaring that there was no such thing now as ministering of angels. He urged Martin Harris to bring the plates themselves to New York so that he could translate them. By the way, Bill, this is still the LDS Church's version, right?
This is still Martin Harris's version of events, allegedly based on Joseph Smith's word.
Okay, so here where it says that he urged Harris to bring the plates themselves to New York so that he could translate them, that is the kernel of truth of what happened in this meeting. That is the one thing that they all agree on, and I think the Book of Mormon supports it, and we'll get there if we get there by the last slide. So upon hearing this, Anthon replied in disdain, "I cannot read a sealed book." Martin Harris left, disheartened but still determined, and sought out another scholar, Dr. Samuel L. Mitchell, who allegedly sanctioned what Professor Anthon had said regarding the characters and translation. So he says, yep, those characters, they're good as gold in that translation. Best I've ever seen.
And then I just note here, if Smith placed real symbols of other languages onto a piece of paper without a translation, separate from the Reformed Egyptian that is allegedly on the plates, this story makes perfect sense. Anthon is simply agreeing that the Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic are actual characters. They are, in fact, true characters. And then I'll just note the image there, far left, again, Charles Anthon. We'll get to the middle one in a little bit. That's Luther Bradish, and RFM will tell us about him. And then this story says Martin Harris allegedly replies that after he visited with Charles Anthon, he went to Dr. Samuel Mitchell, who allegedly sanctioned what Professor Anthon had said. Mitchell can't read Reformed Egyptian either. So
Right.
There's no way he could verify the account.
And once again, everybody, I think I just have to keep repeating this. This is not what Martin Harris said happened. This is what Joseph Smith said Martin Harris told him happened 10 years earlier.
Yes. Harris's version of event. Well, there's one other thing I wanted to just say here.
Mm-hmm.
It's the I cannot read a sealed book, and we'll get to this in a moment. I think we'll say more about this, but I'll just note last week's episode. And by the way, if you're watching this and you missed last week's episode, you really probably should watch that one first and take in what that episode went into, which is that Joseph Smith clearly used Adam Clarke's commentary in the Book of Mormon, because what it demonstrates is that Joseph Smith is not only familiar with Adam Clarke's commentary, he's deeply familiar with the way Adam Clarke is working with Isaiah. And so if Joseph Smith is reading Isaiah within the context of Clarke's commentary, he is coming across, again, he's already got the story of gold plates with ancient languages. He would see Isaiah 29 and this rhetoric around a sealed book. And at least it would occur to me, if I was coming up with a narrative, it would occur to me that I might be able to use this scripture at some point. If I create a narrative about some of these plates being sealed, and if anybody asks about it, they can't read a sealed book, that plays very well into what Isaiah says. And again, these things are ruminating in Joseph Smith's mind. How do we know that? Because Adam Clarke's commentary and much of Isaiah from it is in the Book of Mormon.
Rare is the charismatic leader who does not find himself or herself reflected in the pages of the Bible. And of course, when it says, I cannot read a sealed book, well, Joseph Smith has gold plates. Those are anachronistic. So he puts a seal of some kind of metal around them, even though, of course, there were no books when this was written. It was a scroll, and the seal on a scroll, all of a sudden, that makes a whole lot more sense. We understand how scrolls can be sealed, right? With the king scroll or the sender's scroll to ensure the privacy of what is contained therein, so that on the other end, they break the seal, and then they open up and they know that no one else has been reading it. I cannot read a sealed book, but that's where Joseph Smith went with it.
I also want to note, I think another very important data point here is that Martin Harris is involved in this really cool spiritual moment in history where angels are talking to people, gold plates are in the ground, ancient languages are being translated, a church is about to begin. And when he goes to see Charles Anthon, he doesn't say anything while he's in the room with Charles about any of the backstory. If you or I, RFM, if Joseph said, look, go prove it. Go see an expert. Trust me, this is real. Go see an expert. You and I would walk into the room and we would go, Mr. Anthon, can I have a few minutes of your time? There's a guy back in Palmyra. His name's Joseph Smith. He claims he spoke to angels. He claims this is ancient languages. He says that he's translated it. Here's the piece of paper with the translation. Again,
He's
Vogel
asking
says
me
it
to
wasn't.
finance this thing.
Yep. Here's the other one that has other characters. What do you make of this? What do you think I should do here? That's what you and I would say.
Yeah.
Martin Harris goes in and goes, here's a document. What do you think? Okay, those are real characters. Could you write that down on a piece of paper for me and I'll get the hell out of here. I don't want to take up much of your time.
And make it to the citizens of Palmyra, would you please?
Yeah. Yes. And it's not until, again, according to Joseph Smith and Martin Harris, the faithful account, it's not until Martin leaves, happy that he's got his certification, that Charles Anthon goes, whoa, hold on. Come back for a minute.
For dramatic effect.
I got a few other questions I'd like to ask you.
It's like Columbo at this point.
What's the backstory about all of this? That makes no sense unless Joseph Smith preps Martin Harris and says something like, Martin, if you tell him the backstory, he's going to dismiss you. He's not going to take you seriously. So when you walk into Charles Anthon's office, don't tell him any of that. Just get him to speak about these symbols on this piece of paper, which he gets a certification that they're Assyriac, Chaldaic, Arabic, Egyptian. Yeah. So anyway, I think that's a interesting point in the story.
And a zodiac calendar at the end.
Yeah.
In a pear tree by Humboldt.
All right. I think the next one is me, correct? So Harris's version of events paints a dramatic picture. A respected academic marvels at an unknown script, authenticates it, then retracts his endorsement when supernatural origins are mentioned, even unwittingly echoing a biblical prophecy. Believers soon connected Anthon's reported remark, I cannot read a sealed book, with a prophecy in Isaiah 29. The book is delivered to the learned, saying, read this, and he saith, I cannot, or it is sealed.
It's a good thing to have those ellipses there too.
Yeah, well, they're there. Yep.
Because when you read the whole thing, it doesn't sound anything like what was alleged to have happened.
No. And if you understand, if you go into biblical scholarship, biblical criticism of the Old Testament, there is a perfectly rational explanation for what this story is pointing to that has nothing to do with Mormonism.
That's what I call the judicious use of ellipses.
Yeah. To the early Mormons, this was a stunning fulfillment of scripture, as if Isaiah had foreseen Harris and Anthon's very exchange. And then I've got here Isaiah chapter 29, verses 11 through 14. And the vision of all become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one that is learned, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, Joseph Smith, saying, read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I am not learned. Wherefore the Lord said, for as much as this people draw near me with their mouth, and with their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precept of men. Therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work and a wonder among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hid. By that, they mean that even though RFM and I are making perfectly logical, rational sense, that with God, all things are possible. So there's that. So Isaiah 29, and I'll just note, by the way, a couple of super chats have come in. Kenny B, thank you very much. I saw that one earlier, put it up on the screen, but wanted to say thank you. Okay. Next.
Here we go. Martin Harris returned home convinced and resolute, so much so that he later mortgaged his farm to finance the first printing of the Book of Mormon. Without this story, the Book of Mormon would not have been published, at least not this way. And I don't know that people were lining up to finance it. From the Latter-day Saint perspective, the Anthon episode vindicated Joseph Smith's work.
They couldn't even sell them, RFM. They couldn't give them away. I mean, the church today can't give them away.
Yeah. Yeah, no wonder Lucy left him. A learned man ostensibly verified the characters as authentic ancient writing, only to reject the divine aspect of the story, exactly as prophecy foretold that Isaiah, he was amazing. I mean, can you imagine? 721 or so BCE, he's got stuff to worry about. He's got, there's armies attacking, there's the king. He serves under 4 of them. He's got stuff to do, but nevertheless, he can see what's going to be happening over there at Columbia University in February of 1828. Talk about remote viewing right into Charles Anthon's office. This helped bolster the credibility of Joseph's translation in the eyes of Martin Harris and the early converts. It was a faith-building tale they would recount for years to come, enshrined in Joseph Smith's 1838 official history and LDS scripture, The Pearl of Great Price. Martin mortgaged. Oh, did you want to say this part?
No, you can say it if you want.
Martin mortgaged 240 acres of his farm as security to pay $3,000 for the printing of 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon. And $3,000 in 1830 is worth roughly $103,000 in today's terms. Wow. That's a heck of a commitment.
Yeah, at the very least, I think the one thing that both believers and skeptics or disbelievers can all agree on is that when Martin came back from this experience with Charles Anthon, he was motivated to mortgage his farm in order to pay for the publishing of the Book of Mormon.
Yes. I actually told the story in my farewell. I'm remembering it now. That's how much it bothered me. In my farewell, I told this story.
And I'll just note the house is a nice looking home. I think I have another picture on the next page. Oh, I don't. But Martin Harris's home is in that day. I mean, can you picture this in 1830 1828 when people are building one-room shacks and Joseph Smith sleeping with all his brothers and all the sisters are sleeping in the room with the parents and everybody's
an incredible house. I probably cost him at least $10,000 to build.
Yeah, an expensive home, and then he mortgages the farm $3,000 to print 5,000 copies. They try so there's 75 cents a copy cost. I think they try to sell them for $1.25. And they end up having to lower the price, and eventually they're so worthless that the church today has to give them away. So we
tried to have the Japanese people pay what was it called? A hyakuin? It's 100 yen. It's a coin, roughly equivalent to $1. 100 yen. And the idea was if they paid it, then they would appreciate it more than if it were just given to them.
Yeah.
So I don't know how successful we were with that. Maybe 50-50. I don't know. What I can't remember is where the money went.
I don't know if Martin Harris ever got paid back or not.
No, I mean the Yakuin we're gathering from
Oh,
people to cover these
yeah.
Books of Mormon.
I'd like to know what you did on P-Day with that.
I don't think we did. I didn't. I was very, very Nesheen. I was a Nesheen mono. So I did not do that.
Nesheen means dyed in the wool, true blue and blue through blue and blue or something like that, right?
Boo-hoo. Yeah, dyed in the wool, true and blue.
Yeah.
Nesheen is diligent.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just don't know what happened with that money. I'm sure it went somewhere where it was supposed to go, probably back to the mission home. So Charles Anthon's rebuttal, a hoax in the making? Yes, Charles Anthon had something to say about this, which you will not find out. I don't think you read about this in church stuff, do you? In church literature?
No, nobody told me from 1997 until I found it on the internet on my own. No one told me, hey, by the way, Anton's published a few things and he actually says something very different than Martin Harris.
Yeah, Charles Anthon says Martin Harris is full of shit.
Yeah, yes, he does.
That's basically what it is.
So Charles Anton's rebuttal, a hoax in the making. As the Mormon movement grew, news of Anton's encounter spread, often with the LDS missionaries citing Anton's supposed endorsement as evidence of the Book of Mormon's validity. It wasn't long before Professor Anthon himself got word that his name was being used to support these extraordinary claims. Can you imagine? Years later, and you're like, whoa, hold on. The Mormons are saying that I've verified? Raggy.
You got to be kidding me. They're dragging my name through the mud. This guy is like, he's kind of a big deal. I think he started going to college at 14. He's one of those guys, the kind of guys you hate, but really, really smart. And so he actually has a reputation and for knowing shit. And here's the Mormons out there saying this guy's so dumb that he bought into the foundation text of Mormonism. And he's frothing at the mouth, I'm sure.
Can you imagine? He's sitting at his desk one day and a student comes in and goes, hey, Professor Anthon, is it true? Is it true that you verified that the Reformed Egyptian on the gold plates was true and that Mormonism really is based on a real ancient text? And he goes, huh?
Give me that newspaper.
In 1834, prompted by an inquiry by Eber D. Howe, that's Mormonism Unveiled, that's the famous Philastrius Hurlbut,
yes,
an early skeptic and author investigating Mormonite delusions, Charles Anthon broke his silence. He wrote a detailed letter on the 17th of February, 1834, flatly denying Harris's account. The whole story about my having pronounced the Mormonite inscription to be Reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics is perfectly false. It's not a little false, not half false. It's perfectly false.
It's not easy to be perfect.
To be in academia. Anthon declared emphatically, and I'll go to here to the next slide, but I just want to know.
Don't go to the next slide yet. Okay. Okay. Emphatically, I just wanted to say one thing.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead. Go to the next slide.
Well, actually, I think the next slide is actually going to be the letter, which we can just read, and we can just read what Anthon says. Here's
the thing. You know Philastrius Hurlbut? And you know how he's sort of been charged with alleged to have made up some of these affidavits?
Yeah.
I'm not saying he did that with this one. All I'm saying is that by the time Charles Anthon gets around to issuing his second statement, what year is that, Bill?
1834 is this one.
Yeah, his second statement.
Second statement that's Martin Harris. Let's skip ahead a little bit.
It's just a few years. 1841.
1841.
Okay, so by the time he gets to his 1841 letter, he has completely forgotten that he ever gave this 1834 affidavit. So either he has a remarkable lapse of memory, since it's only 7 years before, and it's something that he's pretty hot about, or I don't know. It's just a strange thing.
If you can read this, I'll read the left-hand side and I'll let you read the right-hand side. Is that fair?
And actually, I think I can come up with a way of maybe making room for both of them. And maybe what it is when he's looking at this, even though it ends up being published, he's looking at this more as a personal letter and correspondence. because it starts with, "Dear
Hmm.
sir, I received this morning your favor of the 9th instant," which means this month, February, "and lose no time in making a reply." So maybe he does remember this, but he's not considering this to be a formal statement.
By the way, again, I don't mean to be rude, but the gullibility of us when we believe, when we're in the believing mindset, and
Mm.
this story's presented to me, and I never even thought, what the hell are other languages doing? Why is Harris taking 2 documents? Why in the world would I believe that uh, Charles Anton can read Reformed Egyptian?
Mm.
And uh, when you start to see the whole thing from a skeptical view, this makes so much more sense that it didn't happen the way Joseph Smith imposed that it did with Martin Harris.
Yeah, in short, the reason why is because you and I, by the way, we were both looking at this as a miracle and not as a magic trick.
Yeah, right. And when you do it that way, the what's the I want to say belief persistence, but it's one of the other ones. Uh, Confirmation bias. We look for what confirms our existing beliefs.
Yes.
So there's that. Okay, I'm going to read the one on the
Mhm.
left, and if you can, I know it's small print, but if you can read it, you'll read the one on the right. I'll say
You want to just skip paragraph by paragraph?
I'd be happy to. So let's do that. New York, February 17th, 1834. Dear sir, I received this morning your favor of the 9th instant, and lose no time in making a reply. The whole story about my having pronounced the Mormonite inscription to be Reformed Egyptian hieroglyphics is perfectly false.
I'm not a crook. Some years ago, a plain and apparently simple hearted farmer called upon me with a note from Dr. Mitchell. By the way,
Mm.
this is another thing, is that Anton will continually place the visit to Mitchell before Martin Harris comes to see him, as contrasted with Martin Harris in the church history saying that he went to see Mitchell after he saw Anton. Some years, okay, so called upon me with a note from Dr. Mitchell of our city.
By the way, unless these two are in connection with each other, and again, there could be a better explanation, but this would seem more likely to be true because if you see Anton first and you leave, you leave his office with him pissed at you, ripping up your certification, and then you go see another expert, there would be, unless they really know each other, I'll let Vogel comment on that. Uh, Anton wouldn't know about Mitchell, but Mitchell would know about Anton. But if you have it in the reverse order, that he sees Mitchell first, then Anton would recognize that he went and saw Dr. Mitchell first.
Well, Anton would definitely know Mitchell. Everybody knew Mitchell, but and Mitchell probably would know Anton. He was just like he was amazing, a child prodigy. So, and it's in the same city, New York, so probably. But regardless, that's just one little thing there that's different between the two. I'm sorry. Upon examining the paper in question, I soon came to the conclusion that it was all a trick, perhaps a hoax. When I asked the person, that's Martin Harris, when I asked the person who brought it how he obtained the writing, he gave me, as far as I can now recollect, the following account. By the way, there is the inclusion of the very natural question, how did you get this writing? Really think about it. You're a professor, you're an academic, you're a person with half a brain, and some guy brings you a piece of paper that has characters written on it, asking you to verify and certify? No. Guess why? Because Charles Anton is smart enough to know that just copying characters down on a paper doesn't mean diddly, because they could be gotten out of books, right? They could be copied out of books. So he's not going to lend his name to something that looks like it's a hoax. And therefore, he says to him, I'm not going to translate these characters. Bring me the book, and I will.
So it continues, a gold book consisting of, and this is him explaining, a gold book consisting of a number of plates of gold fastened together in the shape of a book by wires. By the way, that's interesting. He doesn't remember it being talked about in terms of rings. He remembers it in terms of wires. And I only say that because fabricating wires to hold a book together would have been something easier to do in Joseph Smith's day than the idea of what we see in terms of a harder, more uniform shaped ring that is holding the plates together. I just note that's what he picked up on. Fastened together in the shape of a book by wires of the same metal, had been dug up in the northern part of the state of New York, and along with the book of enormous pair of gold spectacles. These spectacles were so large that if a person attempted to look through them, his two eyes would have to be turned towards one of the glasses merely, the spectacles in question being together too large for the breadth of the human face. Whoever examined the plates through the spectacles was enabled not only to read them, but fully to understand their meaning. All this knowledge, however, was confined at the time to a young man who had the trunk containing the book and the spectacles in his sole possession. The young man was placed behind a curtain in the garret of a farmhouse, and being thus concealed from view, put on the spectacles occasionally, or rather looked through one of the glasses, deciphered the characters in the book, and having committed some of them to paper, handed copies from behind the curtain to those who stood on the outside. Now, I just want to note, I'll let you talk about the curtain if you want to, but I want to at least say this. He remembers mention of the Nephite spectacles. That indicates that he does have a pretty decent memory of the story. He mentions the spectacles being way too big. And I'll just note here, there's a quote from William Smith in church history where he notes that using the Nephite interpreters hurt Joseph Smith's eyes. And this idea of it being too big and having to sort of stare through one lens rather than both of them, not able to really wear them like actual glasses, adds credibility to this being true about what Charles Anthon was told. And it also goes hand in hand with William Smith saying that the Nephite spectacles hurt his brother's eyes, hence why he switched to the seer stone and a hat. Anything you want to say about?
I'm aware that there's been back and forth on this curtain, and now they think the curtain was just over the front door to keep passersby from seeing in. And if there was a curtain obstructing view, that was only with 116 pages. Here's what I think. You know what I think? I think there was always a curtain. I think there was always a curtain. Why would you not have a curtain if you're Joseph Smith? So you can move freely. By the way, having a curtain is going to help with so many other issues that are boiling over with the Adam Clarke commentary research by Colby Townsend and others, right? Because you have to have room to work unobserved. And that's why you have a curtain. That's the only reason you have a curtain. I don't care what you tell the yokels from Palmyra. That's the only reason you have a curtain, is so you can do things unobserved behind it. So I think he probably had one for the whole thing. And I think everything else, all the other descriptions, were trying to gild the lily and make it sound more incredible that he wasn't behind a curtain, because they recognized it sounded fishy to be behind a curtain too, even though they believed it to really be a true translation and the gift and power of God. Not a word, however, once again, this is back to Charles Anthon's first letter. Not a word, however, was said about the plates having been deciphered by the gift of God. Everything in this way was effected by the large pair of spectacles. The farmer added that he had been requested to contribute a sum of money toward the publication of the Golden Book, the contents of which would, as he had been assured, produce an entire change in the world and save it from ruin. Yeah, you should see what this world would look like without Mormonism. So urgent had been those solicitations that he intended selling his farm and handing over the amount received to those who wished to publish the plates. As a last precautionary step, however, he had resolved to come to New York and obtain the opinion of the learned about the meaning of the paper, which he brought with him, and which had been given.
I just want to stop you. He uses that language of learned again.
Yes.
So he's recounting what Harris came with, and maybe the language that Harris used. Harris is using the language of Isaiah 29, or Anthon on his own is using it, just to note that, by the way. I think that's
he's either doing it ironically or coincidentally, and it's probably ironic. Obtain the opinion of the learned about the meaning of the paper which he brought with him, and which had been given him as a part of the contents of the book, although no translation. Okay, Charles Anthon says 6 years later, no translation had been furnished at the time by the young man with the spectacles. So there are only characters. Is that correct? Is that what he's saying here, Bill?
Yeah, that he only verified, I don't want to say that even, but let's say here, obtain the opinion of the learned about the meaning of the paper which he brought with him, and which had been given him as part of the contents of the book, although no translation had been furnished at the time by the young man with the spectacles. Yeah,
Right.
it's
No
untranslated.
translation, according to Charles Anthon. Now, of course, what the apologists do is they say, well, Charles Anthon is in a position because he actually did say that it was true and everything, right? And now he's embarrassed, and so he's making up lies in these statements, right? That's the apologist version. The problem for the apologist isn't that argument, I don't know. It makes some degree of sense, right? There could be some bias there, hypothetically, if that's what happened. It's not only that. The other problem is that on the Mormon side, like we already noted, the Mormon story can't happen according to the Book of Mormon. The Mormon version of the Anthon incident cannot happen according to the Book of Mormon. That's the problem that the Mormon apologists have, not whether you can trust Charles Anthon. And by the way, I'm just saying, if we're talking to a guy who's a child prodigy and it's a classics professor, it's at Columbia, he's a pretty big deal. On the issue of linguistics, I'm probably going to trust him more than a farmer from upstate New York, however wealthy, who talks to Jesus in the form of a deer.
All right. On hearing this odd story, I changed my opinion about the paper, and instead of viewing it any longer as a hoax upon the learned, I begin to regard it as part of a scheme to cheat the farmer out of his money. And I communicated my suspicions to him, warning him to beware of rogues.
Beware of rogues, I tell ya. By the way, we should point out before we go on, this is actually your theory, isn't it? What he's describing is what you think happened, which is that there was really only one piece of paper, or if there were two, but there's one piece of paper and it had just the characters on it. And that was it.
Yeah, I'll just state it here. I think it is possible that there's two papers, but as Vogel says, Anthon says there's no translation. But think about it. If you're Martin Harris and let's just go with the church view. We'll go as far as we can. If Harris takes a document that has Reformed Egyptian on it and a translation, and he gives it to Charles Anthon. Sorry, that's a car outside my window. If he gives him the paper of Reformed Egyptian and a translation, and he says, "What do you think of this?" And Charles Anthon goes, "It looks like somebody's doing translation," which is what it would look like, even though Anthon can't decipher it. There's symbols and there's English next to each symbol. It looks like a translation. Well, what do you think about this other paper? Well, some of those symbols look like, and then he names 3 or 4 languages that he's familiar with.
Martin Harris is dying to be convinced. He's not skeptical. He's what we call a sucker.
What would that sound like to you? You came to hear that this guy is verifying that this work is true. And he tells you on the one hand, this looks like a translation. And on the other hand, these characters are from ancient languages.
Thank you. That's all I need to know. Get my hat.
Yeah. Can I just have you sign a piece of paper?
Would you write it down and make it to the citizens of Palmyra? And the guy says, hang on a second.
He's like a kid trying to get a note to be sick from school,
Signed Epstein's mother.
Yeah, please sign here and let me get the hell out of here. And Anton's like, whoa, I'm not done with the questions, young man.
I was born at night, but not last night, pal. Come back here.
It makes perfect sense when you see it this way. Okay, I read that little top one there. If you'll
beware of rogues. Yeah. He requested an opinion from me in writing, which of course I declined giving. That's going to be a contradiction in his 1841 statement. And he then took his leave, carrying the paper with him. This paper was in fact a singular scrawl. It consisted of all kinds of crooked characters disposed in columns like the forgery, and had evidently been prepared by some person who had before him at the time a book. Did I emphasize that enough? This page, okay, it consisted of all kinds of crooked letters disposed in columns and had evidently been prepared by some person who had before him at the time a book containing various alphabets.
Wait a
Greek and
minute.
Hebrew. I'm
We
sorry.
got to stop. Let's just stop for a moment.
Okay.
He seems to be clearly delineating between the gold plates that were mentioned to him
Yes.
and this book that is sitting in front of this person back in New York that has lots of languages on it. Am I saying that right?
True. I don't know how far this story is developed, or if I mean, how would Martin Harris would he even know that this is supposed to be Hebrew characters or Reformed Egyptian?
No, that what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that Charles Anthon says, "Hey, this project, this Martin Harris guy said there's these golden plates with wire connecting them."
Yes.
And then the guy translating them has got a book in front of him with characters on it of other
Yes.
languages.
Yes.
And those two things he seems to be articulating this in a way as to tell Eberdy Howe that there were two things involved. One is the gold plates, and the other is a book in front of the guy with characters of ancient languages on it.
Well, yeah, unless obviously they're two distinct things, but I think the characters in this story are supposed to be transferred over from the gold plates onto this paper.
Yeah, he calls it a book.
The
Right?
book, the gold book, yes, from the plates of the gold book, or however.
Is he
the
saying
plates of
gold book? I just want to be sure because maybe I'm off. He requested an opinion from me in writing, which of course I declined giving, and he then took his leave, carrying the paper with him. The paper was in fact a singular scrawl. It consisted of all kinds of crooked characters disposed in columns and had evidently been prepared. So he's adding in his conjecture here.
Well, right.
Evidently been prepared by a person who had before him at the time a book containing, which by the way will turn out based on last week's
be right.
episode, it'll turn out to be he nails it.
Yeah. Joseph Smith had a book in front of him which had all these different scripts in it from different languages.
Yes.
And what was it, Bill?
The Adams Clarke commentary.
The Adam Clarke Bible commentary. Exactly.
All right. Sorry. You go ahead and finish this.
No, let's see. Okay. Before him, a book containing various alphabets, Greek and Hebrew letters, crosses and flourishes, Roman letters, and those are the kind we use, right? Romanized letters, in the United States and England. That's what I mean by we. I sometimes forget that we're a worldwide show. Roman letters, even in Rome, Roman letters inverted or placed sideways, like the B, who arranged in perpendicular columns. Now it says who arranged. Roman letters who arranged in perpendicular columns, and the whole ended in a rude delineation of a circle divided into various compartments. That's what Hoffman was also going off of with that circular thing at the end of his forgery. And the whole ended in a rude delineation of a circle divided into various compartments, decked with various strange marks, and evidently copied after the Mexican calendar given by Humboldt, but copied in such a way as not to betray the source whence it was derived.
Yeah. Now, I'll just note both Joseph Smith's report of Martin Harris's account, allegedly, notes that Charles Anthon noticed multiple ancient languages that would have nothing to do with Reformed Egyptian anyway.
Right.
And Charles Anthon confirms this by saying there were symbols from multiple languages, and apparently he got this from having some book in front of him that actually would have contained ancient languages on it, which was completely plausible in the time that this is happening, contemporary to Joseph Smith, hence Adam Clarke's commentary. He says, I am thus particular as to the contents of the paper, inasmuch as I have frequently conversed with my friends on the subject since the Mormonite excitement began, and well remember that the paper contained anything else but Egyptian hieroglyphics.
See, once again, I believe that they were Egyptian at the time, that they had not yet become Reformed Egyptian until 1829.
Yeah, but Anthon says, yeah, there were languages, but Egyptian was not among them.
Yes. Sometime after, the same farmer paid me a second visit. He brought with him the golden book in print and offered it to me for sale. I declined purchasing. He then asked permission to leave the book with me for examination. I declined receiving it. although his manner was strangely urgent. I guess at that time he had no idea that his name was being affixed to this entire episode.
Would you like a book, sir? Thanks, but no thanks.
It's free.
Yeah. I adverted once more to the roguery, which had been, in my opinion, practiced upon him, and asked him what had become of those gold plates. He informed me that they were in a trunk with a large pair of spectacles. I advised him to go to the magistrate and have the trunk examined. He said the curse of God would come upon him should he do this. Isn't that convenient? On my pressing him, however, to pursue the course which I had recommended, he told me that he would open the trunk if I would take the curse of God upon myself. I replied that I would do so with the greatest willingness and would incur every risk of that nature, provided I could only extricate him from the grasp of rogues. He then left me.
Beware of rogues. By the way, as I read that, that's different than the correlated history that we have from the church. And so I don't know if he's right, but by the time the Book of Mormon would have been published and been able to be given to him, the plates would have been returned to the angel long since. So,
Yeah.
like a year before. Well, anyway, it's translation is over basically June of 1829, and the Book of Mormon then gets published in March of 1830. So, if that book's published and able to be given to him, then the history that we have, or the history that we're taught, would say no. Those plates would not be in a box now. They'd be with the angel. It would be sleeping with the fishes.
All right,
so I don't know it's true. I'm just noting that there's a discrepancy there.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
I don't know if the gold plates were actually in a box or with the angel at the time. That's what I mean. That's the discrepancy.
Yes, but by the time the book is published, the plates have been taken back.
I would think so. You see, you don't know without a lot of work what is actually happening versus what is being said happened at a later time, right? And that seems to happen a lot. And that's what I mean about these slippery terms, right? If you just went with the last thing, everything would be fine. If you just listen to what the living prophets say, there wouldn't be any contradictions.
Yep.
Oh, I have thus given you a full statement of all that I know respecting the origin of Mormonism, and must beg you as a personal favor to publish this letter immediately, should you find my name mentioned again by these wretched fanatics. Your respectfully, Charles Anthon.
Oh boy. Okay, that was fun. All right, let me put us back over on the side.
That's actually how he sounded. A lot of people snickered behind his back.
Now that you know Charles Anthon's account, I'm going to read Martin Harris's. I went to the city of New York, again, as told by Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith says, trust me, this is what Martin told me. I went to the city of New York and presented the characters which had been translated with the translation thereof to Professor Charles Anthon, a gentleman celebrated for his literary attainments. Professor Anthon stated that the translation was correct, more so than any he had before seen translated from Egyptian, which is 0. I then showed him those which were not yet translated, separate document, and he said they were Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic, which not necessarily those exact 4 languages, but according to Anthon, he recognized other languages that were written, other symbols on there. They were sometimes turned sideways or upside down, but
so
he
much
recognized
so that he
them.
thought that whoever produced it copied it out of a book.
Yes, that they had a book next to them that they were working from. I then showed him those which were not yet translated. He said that they were Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, and Arabic. And he said they were true characters, which that would be true.
They're real.
Joseph Smith took characters of these languages out of Adam Clarke's commentary and wrote them on a piece of paper. They would, in fact, be true characters. He gave me a certificate certifying to the people of Palmyra that they were true characters, and that the translation of them as had been translated was also correct. Now, that's the part that's in question. I took the certificate and put it into my pocket, not having told this guy any backstory. That's my words. And was just leaving the house when Mr. Anthon called me back. Mr. Harris, come back, please.
Yeah, Charles
asked
Anthon
me.
wasn't suspicious at all with the
No,
story
no,
about gold plates.
no.
on the
He's like,
gold
that
plate.
guy left quickly, and I still had more things I wanted to ask him.
Yeah, because that happens all the time. People copying characters off gold plates and bringing them to New York.
Yeah. Just as I was leaving the house, when Mr. Anthon called me back and asked me how did the young man find out that there were gold plates in the place where he found them? And Martin Harris answered that he goes, I answered that an angel of God had revealed it unto me. He then said to me, this is Harris saying about Charles Anthon. Charles Anthon then said to me, let me see that certificate. I accordingly took it out of my
No, no,
pocket.
that's when you say, nope, nope,
Nope,
no
nope.
givebacks.
That's right.
You gave it to me.
I accordingly took it out of my pocket and gave it to him. When he
No.
took it and tore it to pieces.
You know, they keep giving things they shouldn't give to people. The 116 pages, which Martin Harris is involved in too, given to somebody, shouldn't have given it. Here's the certificate. You got it. You give it to this person. He tears it up. What are you thinking?
How many times is Martin Harris in his life going to give away sacred things?
This
only
is the
to be
Martin
screwed?
Harris version of The Dog Ate My Homework.
And now we'll never know if Anthon, who had no qualifications to read Reformed Egyptian, actually certified that he was able to read Reformed Egyptian.
It's not my fault that he tore it to pieces.
Saying that there was no such thing now as ministering angels, and that if I would bring the plates to him, he would translate them. I informed him that part of the plates were sealed and that I was forbidden to bring them. He replied, I cannot read a sealed book. Dun, 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 prophecy fulfilled. He replied, I cannot read a sealed book. I left him and went to Dr. Mitchell, who sanctioned what Professor Anthon had said, respecting both the characters and the translation. So you don't have to only believe that Charles Anthon agreed that the translated Reformed Egyptian was correct. You have to also believe that Dr. Mitchell also looked at it and said, nailed it, kid. This looks phenomenal.
And apparently, he wasn't able to get a certificate from Dr. Mitchell. He gets rather sparse with the details at that point. Did he ask Dr. Mitchell for a certificate? Did he give one? Did he ask for it back? Did he tear it up? I don't know.
Yeah, if you had your first thing torn, why not ask the second guy to write something down too? It's just as good as the first guy writing it down, because no Mormon knows these guys unless they know this story.
Mitchell is even better. He is a cause celeb. He's amazing, right? And he's older. By 1834, when Charles Anthon is writing his first letter, 6 years later, Dr. Mitchell has already passed away. So we don't get to hear Dr. Mitchell's side of the account, only Charles Anthon's.
Yeah. It strikes me as weird that he didn't go, that last guy ripped that paper up. Wouldn't it be cool if I could just get a second document from Dr. Mitchell? Which automatically tells me that Joseph Smith is misremembering the order of events at the very minimum, and that Anton's correct about him going to Mitchell first and then going to Anthon. Mitchell seems to go like, I don't know. Go check out this with Professor Anthon. He might know something that I don't know.
And some try and make them all right by saying he went to Mitchell first, who immediately referred him to Anthon, had the episode, then went back to Mitchell, which is like, okay, maybe, but a lot of times trying to make everybody right isn't the way to find out what happened, because sometimes people are remembering it wrong.
If you see the first guy and he tears up your document, doesn't it seem so natural to ask the second guy to make you a new document?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. Far from validating the characters, Anthon said that when he first saw the paper, he suspected it was a trick, perhaps a hoax. The professor explained that Harris had come to him with a note of introduction from Dr. Mitchell, asking Anthon to decipher an unusual document that Mitchell himself could not make sense of. That seems like the logical, rational way that the events transpired, is that Mitchell couldn't do anything with it, said, while you're here in town, why don't you go check out with this other guy? And he can't read it either.
Oh, by the way, I'm so sorry. What Bill and I were saying, and I just feel the need to underscore it, is the fact that Samuel Mitchell never, ever told Martin Harris that the translation from the characters was correct. That's total BS. He totally made that up, and he has the certificate to prove it. Oh, wait, he didn't ask for one. So he asked for one from the first guy who says it's all perfect and translated best I've ever seen. Oh, that one I can't produce because he tore the damn thing up. When I mentioned angels, I never should have mentioned angels. And then I go back to Samuel Mitchell, who's even better, who sanctions it and says, yes, the translation is so good. I forgot to get the certificate.
Yeah, and
There are a myriad of excuses why they don't have certificates. The only certificate that they have, which is like Michael Chandler in 1835, right, saying that his translation of the Egyptian is Bafo when he's trying to sell him the mummies for thousands of dollars.
Yeah, and all I'm noting is that the likelihood is that Anton's right, that Mitchell was visited first, Anton was seen second, and which would indicate that Joseph Smith years later is already misremembering this story
Hmm.
or intentionally changing it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But this seems like a detail that wouldn't be that crucial.
Mhm.
And if Smith is misremembering the story, because it would make sense that Harris would ask Dr. Mitchell if he saw him second for a second certificate. Ha, I'll show that Anton guy. I'll just
Yeah.
get it from this guy who's also verifying that the translation is correct.
Screw you, Anton.
So there's that. According to Anton's 1834 letter, the farmer recounted an implausible story. A young man had discovered a gold book, plates buried in upstate New York, along with a fantastically large pair of mystical spectacles used to interpret the inscriptions. Young man kept out of view behind a curtain. We've already talked about all this, but I'm just synopsizing.
If those Jaredite, if they were so big to have that huge spectacles, I mean, wasn't that Book of Mormon, the gold plates, wasn't it, it seemed like it'd be difficult for them it'd be really small. It's like something they would get out of a Cracker Jack box compared to how big they were.
Yeah, but they're reported as being giant. And not only does I think Anton might say it in his one of his other letters as well, mention the large spectacles. But I think there's one other place in church history where maybe that's mentioned also.
Maybe
I'll
the Jaredites had giant plates too. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's that idea, if it's worn on the breastplate, maybe it's bigger because it's further away. So now you
Mhm.
kind of look down from a distance and then your eyes can fixate on a wider distance.
I think that's exactly how it happened. I think you figured it out, Bill.
Yeah. Anton wrote, so why didn't Joseph keep him at a distance? Well, and then why did he give up on him? Why does, we've already done this before too, but why,
You drank the Kool-Aid at this point.
why is this instrument even preserved for the translation of the Book of Mormon only to have Joseph Smith go, my eyes hurt. I don't want to use these big glasses.
Get me my rock. Bring me my rock.
Treasure digging and scamming people and finding buried Spanish bullion that was never buried. Okay, I'll just say
spectacles.
Anton said he changed his opinion about the paper, began to regard it as part of a scheme to cheat the farmer and his money, told him beware of rogues. Of course, I declined giving it in terms of a certificate. So there's that. Okay, I'll let you take this one.
Anton's description of the document itself is telling. In the 1834 letter, he called it a singular scrawl. And you say scrawls write something in a hurried, careless way. Yes.
Mhm.
Consisting of all kinds of crooked characters disposed in columns. It looked to Anton as if someone had copied characters at random from a variety of sources: Greek and Hebrew letters, crosses and flourishes, Roman letters inverted or placed sideways, all jumbled together. By the way, it is the Greek and the Hebrew that he would most readily identify as a classicist. The odd characters were arranged in perpendicular
Hold on a minute.
columns.
That's a big deal. Let's stop. Charles Anton is more accurate about what was in Clarke's commentary than what Harris was about Clarke's commentary. In other words, Harris calls it Chaldaic, Arabic, Assyrian, yeah, and Egyptian.
Arabic, yeah.
Whereas Clarke says that it was Greek and Hebrew and Roman, which would be much more likely to be the characters in Adam Clarke's commentary.
Well, Roman is what you have up here on the slide in every slide you have. It's what we use to write English.
Yeah, I get it. Here's what I'm saying. Who's telling, Harris or Anton's actually represents more closely what would be in Adam Clarke's commentary? And it appears to me that it would be Charles Anton. Anton's actually describing Clarke's commentary better than Harris is.
And certainly there's Greek and Hebrew in the commentary.
Two languages that Harris doesn't mention.
That's true.
Chaldaic, Assyriac,
Egyptian, Arabic.
and Arabic. And whereas Charles Anthon remembers what exactly was in Clarke's commentary.
And strangely, it's Joseph Smith remembering what he says. Martin Harris told him 10 years before. That's where we get that list of 4 languages. Why is Joseph Smith putting those languages on the plates? It's like, doesn't it occur to him that they shouldn't be there? I don't understand. It's a cry for help. The odd characters were arranged in perpendicular. Did I already read this?
In an earlier part, yes. The only reason I have it here again is because I actually included the calendar, the circle calendar thing that they talked about, so folks could see. I think it's one of the brilliant moves, by the way, of Hoffman, and we can talk about this in a moment. But he creates a document that plays in part on a truth, but also does something different so as to sort of throw people off the trail of it being exactly what's described. It's close to being what's described, but obviously Anthon is slightly misremembering.
Well, Anthon is slightly misremembering?
What I'm saying is that Anthon remembers it being a Mexican calendar given by Humboldt.
Yes.
And then when you look at what's on the Hoffman forgery, it's something a little different than that. And it would be almost as if it was something different, but when Anton's recalling it years later, it reminded him of a Mexican calendar given by Humboldt, but it's actually not. So it's a slight distortion, which gives more credibility to a forgery.
Yes. And Anthon specifically says that he recognized it, but it was designed in such a way that you wouldn't be able to tell that it was from Humboldt's calendar, Mexican calendar. In other words, are you reading all of this, or I'm reading? In other words, Anthon suspected that the creator of this transcript had an actual book or source of assorted alphabets and symbols in front of him, including perhaps a depiction of an ancient Mesoamerican calendar from the works of explorer Alexander von Humboldt, and that he cobbled together the sample to appear exotic, yet tried to mask any direct plagiarism. The professor was clearly implying that Joseph Smith or someone assisting him had fabricated the document using reference books.
Yep.
Anthon closed his 1834 letter by affirming that he told Harris the scheme was a fraud and that the characters contained anything else but Egyptian hieroglyphics. He also noted that Harris made a second visit sometime later, proudly showing off a printed copy of the now published Book of Mormon, and evenly pressed Anthon to buy it or at least keep a copy, an offer which Anthon declined. To Anthon, the whole affair was a scheme to cheat the farmer of his money from the start.
And like I said, all I did was I actually included Humboldt's circle calendar there down in the bottom right. And then let me see if I still have this open. I'm going to go back here to page 2. And I'm going to take that down, put this up on the screen, and we can zoom in here. And you can see that that's different than the circle calendar we had. So this is my point, is that Hoffman goes, all right, I'm going to make the document look like what Anthon described, but I'm going to make the calendar actually be a little different than what Anthon describes, which adds credibility to the hoax. It's not a verbatim. It's as if Anthon slightly misremembers, which gives credibility to the forgery. That's all I'm trying to note there. So there's that.
Thank you.
Let me take that off, put this back up. Okay, there's a close-up of it, and you can see the close-up there of Hoffman's forgery, so that you can see that there is a difference, significant difference, I would say.
But it's a circle, damn it.
Yeah, now this may get a little difficult to read. I'm going to see if I got to take me just a moment here. That's not what I want. Did that. All right. So if you don't mind, I'll read this just because the font is so small, but I've got it bigger on my second monitor.
Okay, so this is 1841.
Yeah, this is the second time. There's 3 moments where Charles Anthon puts his experience into the record. And this is the second one. This is New York, April 3rd, 1841.
But this is a letter too.
This is a letter as well.
The underlines are mine, but I did that, Bill.
What's that? Oh, you did the underlines.
I put those little underlines in there. Sorry.
Okay, so on the left-hand side, this gives the context for this letter. Charles Anthon did not stop there. He provided additional accounts in later years that both reinforced his stance and added a few twists. In 1841, Anthon wrote another letter to Reverend T.W. Coit. recalling the encounter. This time he contradicted one detail from his earlier letter. He now claimed that he had given Harris something in writing after all,
That liar.
albeit not an endorsement. He said he dashed off a quick note, partly for the man's sake and partly to let the individual behind the curtain see that the trick was discovered. The note's content, according to Anthon, stated that the marks on the paper appeared to be merely an imitation of various alphabetical characters and had, in my opinion, no meaning at all connected with them. In 1841 account, Anthon reiterated that the characters were a motley assortment arranged in columns like a Chinese mode of writing, with Greek, Hebrew, and all sorts of letters intermingled with sundry delineations of half-moon, stars, and other natural objects, ending in what he called a rude representation of the Mexican calendar. So, New York, April 3rd, 1841, Reverend and dear sir, I have often heard that the Mormons claimed me for an auxiliary, but as no one until the present time has ever requested from me a statement in writing.
Okay, it's worse than I thought. What's going on?
Well, he claims
7 years before, E.D.
Yeah.
Howe came to him and requested a statement in writing on this subject.
Yeah, and he doesn't remember that, or according to apologists, he's misrepresenting the facts because he's embarrassed.
But I don't know how that helps him not be embarrassed by forgetting the fact he already gave a statement about it.
Yeah. I have not deemed it worth to say anything publicly on the subject. What I do know of the sect relates to some of the early movements. And as the facts may amuse you, while they will furnish a satisfactory answer to the charge of my being a Mormon proselyte, I proceed to lay them before you in detail. Many years ago, the precise date I do not recollect, a plain-looking countryman called upon me with a letter from Dr. Samuel L. Mitchell, requesting me to examine and give my opinion upon a certain paper marked with various characters, which the doctor confessed he could not decipher, and which the bearer of the note was very anxious to have explained. I'm actually going to move this over to my.
So he does give this additional detail. He still hasn't going to Mitchell first, but now the note from Mitchell says, "Yeah, I can't read these," and that's why you referred him, right?
Yep. Which makes way more sense than the Mormon faithful story.
Yeah, usually you refer somebody when you can't figure out the problem, whether it's medical, academic. If he knew the answer, why would he have to refer him over to Anthon?
Yep. Marked with various characters, which the doctor confessed he could not decipher, and which the bearer of the note was very anxious to have explained. A brief examination of the paper convinced me that it was a mere hoax, and a very clumsy one, too. The characters were arranged in columns, like the Chinese mode of writing, and presented the most singular medley that I had ever beheld. Greek, Hebrew, and all sorts of letters, more or less distorted, either through unskillfulness or from actual design, were intermingled with sundry delineations of half-moon, stars, and other natural objects, and the whole ended in a rude representation of the Mexican zodiac. The conclusion was irresistible, that some cunning fellow had prepared the paper in question for the purpose of imposing upon the countryman who brought it, and I told the man so without any hesitation. He then proceeded to give me the history of the whole affair, which convinced me that he had fallen into the hands of some sharper, while it left me in great astonishment at his simplicity. The countryman told me that a gold book had been recently dug up in the western or northern part, I forget which, of our state. And he described this book as consisting of many gold plates, like leaves, secured by a gold wire passing through the edges of each, just as the leaves of a book are sewn together. And presented in this way, the appearance of a volume. Each plate, according to him, was inscripted with unknown characters. And the paper which he handed me, a transcript of one of these pages. On my asking him by whom the copy was made, he gravely stated that along with the golden book, there had been dug up a very large pair of spectacles. So large, in fact, that if a man were to hold them in front of his face, his two eyes would merely look through one of the glasses. And the remaining part of the spectacles would project a considerable distance sideways. These spectacles possessed, it seems, a very valuable property of enabling anyone who looked through them, or rather through one of the lenses, not only to decipher the characters of the plates, but also to comprehend their exact meaning and be able to translate them. My informant assured me that this curious property of the spectacles had been actually tested and found it to be true. The young man, it seems, had been placed in the garret of a farmhouse with a curtain before him.
Hey, Bill.
By the way, there's no need to mention the curtain unless it's between them. In other words, if it is a curtain at the doorway, it never gets mentioned in the conversation with Anthon. The only reason Harris says a curtain is because the curtain is between him and Joseph Smith.
Right. And of course, Anthon sees that as a further evidence of a deception.
Yes.
As anybody would who's not a Mormon talking about Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon. I wanted to say a couple things if I can. The first thing is that it might seem strange that the older and more famous Mitchell, whose name, by the way, is spelled alternately with an I versus an E at the end, and that's why sometimes it'll be different up here, but that he's the one who is so celebrated, and why can't he figure this out? Why does he have to refer Martin Harris over to Anthon? And that's largely because Anthon is the classicist, and I believe that Samuel Mitchell was a naturalist.
The fact that Anthon acknowledges a curtain tells you that the most rational explanation is that the curtain was between Martin Harris and Joseph Smith.
Oh, it is. And it's from this, by the way, that people think, some people, scholars, think that there was a curtain in between, but that was only during the 116 pages with Joseph Smith and Martin Harris, right? And then later on, there was a curtain, but it was only in front of the door. I doubt that. I think that the witnesses to the later dictation of what we have now as the Book of Mormon have proven themselves so willing to make the story better, more impossible, more miraculous in ways that we can catch them lying about it or fabricating about it for effect, okay? That I have no compunction about not accepting at face value their statement that he was out in front of everybody when he was doing this dictation. I'll buy it with his head in a hat, which they thought would be, wow, this is evidence that he's really getting revelation. He's not doing it behind a curtain.
If the curtain is in the doorway, there's no plausible reason for why it makes it into the conversation with Charles Anthon.
Oh, it's definitely behind the curtain because remember, he's handing out the paper from behind the curtain in this first statement, is what Anthon says.
Okay, sweet. So let me just go back to this. I got to find where it said that.
Oh, the other thing was that while you were reading, I went ahead and decided I'd look up and find out when spectacles or glasses were invented. Guess when? The 13th century, 1286 in Italy, northern Italy, which is a little late for the Jaredites. I'm just saying.
Yeah. He had also copied off one page of the book in the original character, which he had in like manner handed over to those who were separated from him by the curtain. And this copy was the paper which the countryman had brought with him. As the Golden Book was said to contain very great truths and the most important revelations of a religious nature, a strong desire had been expressed by several persons in the countryman's neighborhood to have the whole work translated and published. A proposition had accordingly been made to my informant to sell his farm and to apply the proceeds to the printing of the Golden Book. Sorry, another car going by.
Mm-hmm.
And the golden plates were left with him as security until he should be reimbursed by the sale of the work. To convince him more clearly that there was no risk whatever in the matter, and that the work was actually what it claimed to be, he was told to take the paper, which purported to be a copy of one of the pages of the book, to the city of New York and to submit it to the learned. Now, here's the key. It's Joseph Smith who's telling Martin Harris to take it to the learned in that quarter. In other words, Joseph Smith is already prepping the situation for Isaiah language. Is my
it's
point.
Possible unless Anthon by this time has read, or by 34 has read, the similarity drawn between him and the learned in Isaiah from Mormon literature.
That makes sense as well. Thank you. Take it to submit it to the learned in that quarter, who would soon dispel all of his doubts and satisfy as to the perfect safety of the investment. As Dr. Mitchell was our Magnus Apollo.
He's the big one. He's the big cheese.
Yeah, in those days, the man called first upon him, but the doctor, evidently suspecting some trick, declined to give any opinion about the matter and sent the countryman down to the college.
Another reason why it would make sense for him to go to Mitchell first. He's
To
the
see-
celebrity.
Yeah, to see in all probability what the learned pundits, and he puts that in quotes, by the way, in that place would make of the affair. On my telling the bearer of the paper that it was an attempt, paper that an attempt had been made to impose on him and defraud him of his property, he requested me to give him my opinion in writing about the paper which he had shown me. I did so without hesitation, partly for the man's sake, and partly to let the individual behind the curtain see that
Okay,
his trick was discovered.
right there, we need to pause because that's the material contradiction in this letter, 1841 versus the 1834 letter allegedly written by Charles Anthon.
Yeah, in part, though, because Harris allegedly and Smith claimed that Charles Anthon wrote a letter of certification, which Anthon in the first letter says, I didn't do. I never wrote anything. In the second letter, he says, I didn't write a letter of certification. I wrote something that was intended to let the guy behind the curtain know that I was onto the ruse.
Mhm.
And that's a little different than claiming you gave a certification letter or that you didn't. This is a completely separate thing that he's giving him. Does that make sense?
Yes, I will also say that a person who's forgotten that they gave a statement 7 years before could also forget that they gave a statement to Martin Harris even longer ago.
Yeah. Um,
When you get the matter, can I do that one? The
you're talking about the
penultimate
next
paragraph.
Yeah, I'm just
You
trying to see
there?
if I'm there. No, I don't think I'm there yet. So let me just check here.
Okay.
Requested me to give him my opinion in writing about the paper which he had shown me. I did so without hesitation, partly for the man's sake and partly to let the individual behind the curtain see that the trick was discovered. The import of what I wrote was, as far as I can recollect, simply this: that the marks in the paper appeared to be merely an imitation of various alphabetical characters and had, in my opinion, no meaning at all connected with them. I cannot read a sealed book. I cannot read these characters. Again, that's me adding.
Mhm.
And
But
had in
that's
my,
absolutely true because nobody can make heads or tails out of that Anthon transcript.
yeah, had, in my opinion, no meaning at all connected with them. The countryman took his leave with many thanks and with the express declaration that he would in no shape part with his farm or embark on the speculation of printing the golden book.
And if that's true, then something changed his mind. And is the something that changed his mind, Martin? I told you, this is the gaslighting part. Don't you remember I told you it's Reformed Egyptian? Nobody knows the. Well, then why did you take it? It was a test. It was a test to have you take it. I mean, this stuff writes itself once you know how it goes.
I would also suggest that it's at this moment that Joseph utilizes Isaiah 29 to let Martin Harris know that prophecy had just been fulfilled, Martin.
Mhm.
This
Yeah.
guy just told you he can't read a sealed book.
Can you imagine how good it feels to fulfill Bible prophecy?
Yeah.
It makes you feel really warm inside.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
the matter rested here for a considerable time until one day when I had ceased entirely to think of the countryman and his paper, the same individual, to my great surprise, paid me a second visit. He now brought with him a 12th volume, which he said, that's the Book of Mormon, which he said was a translation into English of the Golden Bible. He also stated that notwithstanding his original determination not to sell his farm, he had been induced evidently to do so and apply the money. Now, he didn't sell his farm, he did mortgage it and apply the money to the publication of the book and had received the golden plates as a security for payment. Wow. He had received the gold plates as a security for payment. I don't think that part was in the first letter. For payment, security for payment. He begged my acceptance of the volume, assuring me that it would be found extremely interesting and that it was already making great noise in the upper part of the state. Suspecting now that some serious trick was on foot, and that my plain-looking visitor might be, in fact, a very cunning fellow, I declined his present, and merely contented myself with a slight examination of the volume while he stood by. The more I declined receiving it, however, the more urgent the man became in offering the book, until at last I told him plainly that if he left the volume, as he said he intended to do, I should most assuredly throw it out after him as he departed. I then asked him how he would be so foolish as to sell his farm and engage in this affair, and requested him to tell me if the plates were really of gold. In answer to this latter inquiry, he said that he had never seen the plates themselves, which were carefully locked in a trunk, but that he had the trunk in his possession. By the way, if this is correct, and it's an account of somebody who's saying he heard it directly from the horse's mouth, okay, then what's the three witnesses thing?
Hey,
the three witnesses happened before the Book of Mormon was published. It happened in 1829. The Book of Mormon was published in 1830. Obviously, the Book of Mormon had to have been published for Martin Harris to bring the Book of Mormon to give it to this guy, or try and give it to him. And yet, according to Charles Anthon, according to him, he's saying these things that would not have happened as of that time, I think.
By the way,
I was just reading, Bill.
Yeah, I'll find that for you in just a second. I just want to note two things. One is that notice what happened here. Joseph Smith says, hey, you can keep the gold plates as collateral, but I need you to leave them locked in this box, and you're to never look at them. But just trust me, they're in there. And if for some reason I don't pay you back, then by all means, you're welcome to open the box up, and now you've got the gold plates.
It's a great story, isn't it? But once again, it's the same kind of thing with an additional detail of having the plates hanging around after, at least we understand now, that they would have been given back to the angel.
Yeah. And then I just want to note, oh, go ahead, please.
But I don't know. Maybe the angel gave him back for a while for him to use them as collateral. Maybe this is what it was. Maybe this is the real story. Maybe this is why Martin Harris decided that in spite of what it was, that Samuel Mitchell and Charles Anthon told him in New York that he would go ahead and mortgage the farm because he had security.
Yeah, except if you're not allowed to look in the box, how do you know the plates are actually in there? It seems like you could have a box with some bricks or something to add some weight, and then you just got $3,000 in a mortgage from a mortgage farm. I'll just note too, somebody's asking. Let me see here. Where is it at? Right here.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Ray says, I thought the trunk would not lock. And I'll just note that the box that could not lock was a temporary fixture. We still have it. The church still claims to have that box. Although when you look at its dimensions, the plates
would never fit in it. It would not have closed over it, right?
Yeah. But if you remember, Joseph Smith, I believe he asked his brother Hiram to make a box. Hiram never got the box done. So Joseph had to go to who? Willard Chase, I believe, and borrow a box from him, if I'm not mistaken.
Willard Chase was a generous soul.
So they had anticipation for a box that would be fabricated that would hold the plates and lock. The box never got built in time. Another box was used. That box is allegedly in the church's possession today. But to answer your question, Ray, there is also the possibility that Hiram Smith actually did eventually finish the box he was supposed to make, one that would lock. And that would explain perhaps at least in one way in which Joseph would have a box that could actually lock, because he can't take the chance on Martin opening the thing up.
No.
So he has to put spiritual damnation on anyone who looks at the plates and make sure the box is locked so nobody will be tempted. Yeah. I'm sure they were in there though, RFM. I couldn't imagine, any other scenario where they wouldn't be in there.
Wouldn't it be funny if this were the answer? In spite of the speculation about everything else, that this is what it took for Martin Harris to go ahead and mortgage the farm.
Seems like it was.
Joseph Smith says, here's a box.
It seems like it was. It seems like Martin would not do this until he had the plates as collateral, but withheld from view in a box that he has to trust they're in there.
Okay. Well, it's definitely got a good spot at the table. This explanation for why it was that Martin Harris did this. I feel kind of silly giving a talk about this at my farewell back in November of 1979 and not bringing this up or knowing this part. The more I declined receiving it, we did that. I advised him by all means to open the trunk and examine its contents, you idiot. And if the plates proved to be of gold, which I did not believe at all, to sell them immediately. His reply was that if he opened the trunk, the curse of heaven would descend upon him and his children and his pets and their children. Okay.
You may never open that box of collateral, otherwise be damned you will.
I know. I mean, what good is that? How are you ever supposed to? I don't know. What do you call it? You used to be a manager of a pawn store.
I would never have bought this story. I can tell you that.
You would take this to the bank and say, I need to deposit this. And they say, okay, what's in it? I said, I don't know. But you can't, it's gold, but you can't open it. Well, we need to count it. What?
You fool, Martin. You countryman.
Dumb. Is that the one? Dumb.
Yeah.
Martin Harris. Yeah. So in his possession, I advise him by all means to open the trunk, examine its contents. Okay, right. If he opened the trunk, the curse of heaven would descend upon him and his children. However, added he, and I underlined this part, however, added he, I will agree to open it, provided you take the curse of heaven upon yourself for having advised me to the step. You can almost see him looking at him, daring him to take this test, which he knows he will never do. Except that Charles Anthon says, I told him I was perfectly willing to do so and begged he would hasten home and examine the trunk, for he would find that he had been cheated. He promised to do as I recommended and left me, taking his book with him. I have never seen him since. The embarrassing part is when you open up the box that's supposed to have all the gold in it, and it's just a damn monkey.
That you paid 2 pence to see.
I know sometimes a monkey's fun, but not when it's supposed to be gold.
This story alone just trashes Martin Harris's credibility as a gullible person. Like he is so gullible. He took a box with alleged gold plates inside, but not allowed to verify such, and held them as collateral.
If it's true, of course, it's also possible that Charles Anthon is misrecollecting and he's trying to fill in the gap, which he's going, why the heck did this guy do that? I told him not to do it. He comes back, he did it. That's got to bother him for a while and say, why on earth would he do that? That's a gap that he's got to fill. And maybe he filled it with his story. I don't know. But he's a witness, and this is not a late account. And he's saying that this is what Martin Harris told me. That's pretty good evidence. Okay, so such is a plain state. Okay, this is you. Such is a plain statement. You want to read that because I think I'm getting a headache from squinting to read this print.
All right, so such is a plain statement of all I know respecting the Mormons. My impression now is that the plain-looking countryman was none other than the prophet Smith himself, who assumed an appearance of great simplicity in order to entrap me, if possible, into some recommendation of his book.
He and Martha Brotherton need to get together on this one.
Yeah, I'm gonna need Michelle Stone to sort this one out, aren't I?
If you know that, you know it. We're not going there. Yeah. That's we're going late already.
That the prophet aided me by inspiration in interpreting the volume as only one of the many amusing falsehoods which the Mormonites utter relative to my participation in their doctrines. Of these doctrines, I know nothing whatsoever. Whatever. Nor have I ever heard a single discourse from any of their preachers, although I have often felt a strong curiosity to become an auditor, since my friends tell me that they frequently name me in their sermons and even go so far as to say that I am alluded to in the prophecies of Scripture, Isaiah 29.
Mhm.
If what I have written here shall prove of any service in opening the eyes of some of their deluded followers to the real designs of those who profess to be apostles of Mormonism, it will afford me satisfaction equaled, I have no doubt, only by that which you yourself will feel on the subject. I remain very respectfully and truly your friend, Charles Anthon.
He may well have been right about copying characters out of a book. What the heck if he was right about it being Joseph Smith, Bill?
Because we get the story from Smith, who says, no, Martin Harris told me this, and I'll tell you what Martin said. Martin's already out of the church by then. Does seem interesting, doesn't it?
I don't know.
I'll give the benefit of the doubt here because it's not even necessary to invoke it. I'll give the benefit of the doubt. It's Martin Harris who showed up because the story already has 100 problems anyway. It's an absurd story to take this in a faithful view.
Right. So what's one more problem?
Yeah. All right. I'll leave you this.
Finally, in 1844, Anthon wrote yet a third statement, again calling the characters mere trash and emphasizing that he immediately told Harris he was being fooled. He again described rude imitations of Hebrew and Greek letters and figures of sun, moon, stars, and etc. in parallel columns. And this is it. So this is Reverend and Dear Sir. I bet that's Dear Sir. August 12th, 1844. The Mormon story is a complete falsehood. A person called upon me many years ago and showed me a pretended transcript of a page of the Golden Bible, desiring me at the same time to favor him with the translation. Okay, that's consistent. Here's the characters. Give me the translation. It required but a single glance to perceive that the whole affair was a sheer and very clumsy imposition. The paper contained in one or two parallel columns rude imitations of Hebrew and Greek characters together with various delineations of sun, moon, stars, and etc. The man who handed me the scrawl had previously taken it to Dr. Mitchell and had been referred by that gentleman to me. He stated that he was about to engage in the affair of the Golden Book, and if my memory served me right, intended to sell his farm and appropriate the proceeds to the publication of the volume. I told him very frankly that the whole matter was a hoax and cautioned him against being cheated out of his property. You will perceive from this what a monstrous lie the Mormons are uttering when they say that I promised to decipher the piece of writing in question. If the original records were brought to me, I told the man at once that he was imposed upon and that the writing was mere trash. What Dr. Mitchell may have said, I know not. Of one thing, however, I am very sure that I never professed to be acquainted with the vast number of languages of which the Mormons speak. That I never professed to be acquainted with the vast number of languages of which the Mormons speak, Bill. That's interesting, huh?
It is.
And would deserve to be laughed at if I thought that any other language than gibberish were required to obtain a knowledge of the contents of the paper that was handed to me, yours truly, Chaz Anthon. And I think it's interesting because basically saying, I know Hebrew and I know Greek. I don't know all these other things that are being attributed to me in the 1838 history of Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyrian, and Arabic. I think that's what he's saying.
And again, that comes off. Again, the apologists want to go, this guy contradicts himself and Harris doesn't. You should trust Harris. But Anthon here, what he's saying matches.
By the way, Harris cannot contradict himself because he gives only one statement, and not even that. The statement we have from him is what Joseph Smith said he said 10 years later.
And Adam Clarke's commentary matches up more closely with how Professor Anthon describes what was brought to him, not what Joseph Smith says Martin Harris got back from Anthon.
Good point.
Yeah.
Across these accounts, Professor Anthon's story remains consistent in the main thrust. He never authenticated the characters. On the contrary, he judged them a clever fraud and said he told Martin Harris so in no uncertain terms. The few inconsistencies, whether or not he briefly gave a written note, suggest Anthon was keen to distance himself from any suggestion that he endorsed the Golden Bible. Indeed, as he wrote, he was alarmed to find his name being used by those impostors in gaining proselytes, and he sought to set the record straight. In doing so, Charles Anthon essentially accused Joseph Smith of concocting the transcript, using a book containing various alphabets, a claim that brings us to a fascinating theory about what that source might have been, one that most of you grasp after last week's episode in this rather lengthy 2-hour prelude.
Yeah. I'll also note when you and I learned this story in the faithful lens, it was like Charles Anthon's like, let me have this book. I will translate. And it makes a whole lot more sense that Anthon's like, this isn't real. I'll tell you what, bring me the book. Let me translate it. We'll see how this goes. This is going to unfold in a way that I'm going to find out this is not legitimate. This is a fraud. And that makes a whole lot more sense.
Yes. He's exposing the fraud. He's trying to help Martin Harris realize he's being duped with gold plates that he's not allowed to see.
Yeah. So now we've already said it. Everybody already knows where we're going. The trick is over. Adam Clarke's commentary, a hidden source of characters. In puzzling over how Joseph Smith, who had limited formal schooling, could devise a lineup of characters that might fool a scholar at first glance, Adam Clarke's Bible commentary is a perfect fit. Adam Clarke was a renowned British theologian. Again, I'm saying this only because folks will be watching this and not seeing last week's episode, whose multi-volume commentary on the Bible published in the early 1800s was widely available in America. His work was erudite and exhaustive, delving into the original language of Scripture. Clarke's commentary frequently included references to Hebrew, Aramaic, which is called Chaldaic, Greek, and occasionally Latin or Syriac words, sometimes printing them in their original scripts alongside explanations. For example, when elucidating Old Testament passages, Clarke might cite the Hebrew text or the Chaldaic paraphrase. In the New Testament, he often discussed the Greek. It wasn't uncommon for Clarke to sprinkle his notes with these ancient alphabets and characters, giving very diligent readers a taste of what the biblical languages look like on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Consider the exotic mix of scripts Charles Anthon described on the paper, a bit of Greek, a bit of Hebrew. Again, which 19th century scholars often called the Chaldaic character for certain Old Testament sections. So there is, again, I sort of missed this slide, so I will acknowledge that what Smith claims Harris said is at least a little bit better match than we were intimating. Possibly some symbols that could be mistaken for Assyrian or other scripts. All those terms, Egyptian, Chaldaic, Assyriac, Arabic, were part of the vocabulary of biblical scholarship. Again, it's the common sort of languages that would be mentioned at the day and appear in works like Clarke's commentary. I just note there's a page there from Adam Clarke's commentary, and there are arrows pointing to how he would use symbols in the text.
Yes.
And so it wouldn't be too difficult. I show other ones here.
They're right there.
So all Smith has to do is send these symbols with Harris to to these professors in New York, and they would certainly say these are real symbols of ancient languages because they were.
Yes. The problem is he can't write them in a sentence such that they mean something.
Nope.
By the way, I would just say that even if he used Assyrian and Syriac and those other texts that are found in those commentary sections of Adam Clarke, then if Charles Anthon did not know them, which he said in his second statement or third statement that he did not know them, then he might have just seen them as the flourishes that he talks about.
Yeah.
It might have been a trick that Charles Anthon didn't get.
Yep.
Now imagine Joseph's position. He has told others that he has a set of golden plates covered in strange writing that no contemporary scholar can read, since Reformed Egyptian is unknown. Once again, that's in 1829 when it becomes unknown, my theory. But these plates either don't exist or are a modern fabrication. He needs to convince Martin Harris and indirectly others that the characters are authentic. What better way than to copy actual characters from known ancient alphabets? If he copied a Hebrew word here, a Greek letter there, maybe an Arabic-looking squiggle or a bit of shorthand from the commentary's footnotes, the end result would be a polymath's doodle, exactly the kind of medley that could impress a scholar at a glance. The idea isn't that Anthon would recognize a coherent message, but rather that he'd see familiar elements and think, this does resemble genuine scripts. And indeed, according to Harris, Anthon did initially say the characters were authentic and from multiple languages. And now, knowing that Adam Clarke's commentary was utilized for the production of the Book of Mormon, we can now see that Joseph Smith likely curated his transcript from sources like Adam Clarke's commentary to ensure it looked credible if scrutinized by an expert. Can I say something? If Joseph Smith put in Hebrew and he put in Latin on this piece of paper, and he put in Syriac and he put in Assyriac and all these other things, hoping that that would help fool somebody, but the person who leaves a statement, who's Charles Anthon, didn't know the Assyrian, didn't know the Chaldaic, didn't know anything except for the Hebrew and the Greek because he's a classicist, right? That would fit comfortably with Joseph Smith in 1838, remembering that Martin Harris told him 10 years before that Charles Anthon had said that all of those other scripts that Joseph Smith had worked so hard to get out of the commentary and onto this piece of paper, that Anthon had identified them all, because that was the whole point in the first place of putting them there, if that's correct.
He wants them identified. It's why he's using actual characters from other ancient languages. He wants the expert on the other side to go, there's definitely some ancient language here.
Mm-hmm. And the scenario fits perfectly within Harris's report of the incident, that Anthon saw a paper with recreations of the symbols used in Adam Clarke's commentary and gave some sort of acknowledgement that these symbols were to some degree legitimate. Harris has what he wants in an expert's agreement and begins to leave. Anthon senses that he better find out what the purpose of this was and requests Harris return. Then, when hearing from Harris more of the story involving some person claiming to be translating an unknown language via magic god powers, I don't think I wrote this. Did you write this?
Via language, via magic, god powers. Yeah, supernatural god magic, always.
And Anthon, discerning that this is some sort of hoax or scam, refuses to put his name with the project and can see that something dubious is happening.
Doesn't that make a whole lot more sense with all the facts and details? Again, if you grant as much of the faithful perspective as you can, while not allowing absurd points to be made that cannot be substantiated with any form of logic or rational thinking.
This explanation makes, I think, as good a sense of the evidence, if not better, than any other theory that I know.
Yeah. Is this scenario realistic? On one hand, it aligns uncannily well with Anthon's own later suspicions. He wrote that the document had evidently been prepared by some person who had before him at the time a book containing various alphabets. Adam Clarke's commentary, a book of various alphabets with at least the ones that Anthon named, was exactly that. And we now know this commentary finds its way into the Book of Mormon. If Joseph aimed to trick the learned, quote, unquote, just long enough to win Harris's confidence, using a respected commentary as a source for bona fide characters would be a clever tactic. It's rational in the sense that Joseph had a strong motive, securing Harris's support and available means, access to Clarke's commentary, and the outcome in Harris's retelling was exactly what Joseph would have wanted. The Anthon Transcript episode had far-reaching implications for early Mormon credibility. In the short term, it achieved Joseph Smith's immediate goal. Martin Harris was convinced enough to throw his weight behind the Book of Mormon project. Harris's financial backing, he paid for the printing of the first 5,000 copies, was absolutely crucial.
Well, he had all that security in gold.
In a box that he never saw the inside of the box. Yeah. They're very, it's like Schrodinger's cat. Until you open the box, you don't know what's inside.
The gold that is in this box that you can't open is worth like twice the $3,000 I'm trying to get out of you. This is a bargain, Martin, a bargain.
The Book of Mormon, again, that only works, by the way, if Joseph Smith believed the plates to be gold, not an inexpensive alloy worth nothing.
Tumbaga.
Yeah. From his perspective, Professor Anthon had confirmed the authenticity of the characters, the legitimate ones off Clarke's commentary, only rejecting the story due to the skepticism of angels, and the narrative made Harris something of a heroic figure of the prophecy, the faithful one who obtained the words of the learned, only to have the learned man fulfill Isaiah's prophecy by saying he couldn't read a sealed book. For believers, this was a sign that God's hand was in the work. It was worth noting that Martin Harris never wavered from his testimony of the Book of Mormon's divine origin, even long after he left the LDS Church for a time. Although he did join the Quakers, he did see Jesus in the form of a deer, which you mentioned earlier. Really doesn't have the credibility to be trusted since he took a box without verifying what was inside as collateral. But the Anthon incident likely bolstered his resolve that he was dealing with something real or important, or, as you pointed out, having the plates, even though you weren't able to look at them as collateral, might have been what pushed him to mortgage the farm.
And the strange thing about the box is that even Martin could tell it didn't seem to be as heavy as gold, but every now and again when he bumped it, a strange sound came out of the box, and it sounded like ee ee ee. Oh, that's so much better.
Harris.
Can you do that again? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's good. You sound like
My
Judy.
dog, now my dog's barking. Now Teddy's over on the other side of the house. Harris might have misunderstood or selectively heard what he wanted from Anthon. The fact that Anthon did confirm some legitimacy to the characters might have been enough for Harris to take it as the whole thing being a true translation. Perhaps Anthon politely said the characters resembled various alphabets, but never meant to imply that they were authentic or that the translation was correct. When Harris returned to Joseph, desperate for reassurance, Joseph could have framed it as a full endorsement, knowing Harris's bias. In short, skeptics see the story at best a miscommunication and at worst a deliberate fabrication by Joseph to keep Harris on the hook. They also note that Anthon had no apparent reason to lie in these letters. I guess unless you really do believe that he really did give verification to translation of Reformed Egyptian being accurate when there is zero ability, both via the Book of Mormon and based on the characters we have today, that he could actually translate Reformed Egyptian. So by 1834, he was under attack. He was simply clarifying the record when asked. His detailed memory of the characters, mentioning things like the Mexican calendar image, adds credibility to his account since those details were not public knowledge or in Harris's story. Now, I don't think that part should have been in there. I don't know where I copied that from.
It can give credibility. It can also give verisimilitude.
Yeah. All right. So there's that. And now RFM, you want to add a few details?
Not even a chance, my friend. No, I heard the sound as of a million voices crying out and then suddenly going silent. No RFM slides. We're at 2.5 hours. I'll save it for another time because I've got 20 slides. This would keep us here for another 2.5.
Okay, let me just skip through here, see if there's anything else.
No. Everybody's taking snapshots.
Oh, yeah, well,
find out what I'm going to talk about. There's the bonus material. There's the resources.
I thought there was one more thing, but that's okay. I don't have it. Okay, well, then let me change this. You're sure? Because I'm happy to stay.
No.
The faithful story has.
You may not know my name, but my last name is not Delenn.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I'll open the phone lines and we can sort of give a closing statement and then we'll take a few phone calls. So banners. So there it is. Phone call at the bottom, 662-667-6667 or 662 Mormons. And if you want to come directly into the studio, we welcome that. That'll make the quality of this conversation much better. I will put that into the live comments in the live chat there. Sorry, the comments in the live chat. I'll just note, I'd love to get your point of view, but I'll just say there are multiple logical problems. And this is the Mormons, and again, I was one of them. Mormons struggle so hard to just use rational thinking, but there are so many problems with the faithful telling of this story. And there are so many things that are better explained by the Charles Anthon critical side of the story that anybody who doesn't choose to see it that way, to me, just is putting their gullibility as a believing Mormon on full display. Your thoughts?
I think it's a fascinating story and very, very interesting trying to figure out what really happened, though I don't think we'll ever know for sure. I think that the one thing that we can be relatively sure of in this whole thing is that Charles Anthon never told him that this was a good translation. Okay, that never happened. Not in a million years. In fact, I think it's quite questionable whether any translation was sent with him, because that would immediately expose Joseph Smith to, being called out. So, and if he did, it wasn't with regular characters that are actual from ancient manuscripts. It would be with made-up characters, because that would keep it from being called out as well. That's the unknown language, which becomes the Reformed Egyptian, I think, that nobody can read. But that has to wait till next year. At this point, anybody can read it, as long as you're smart enough and you are at Columbia University in New York and you're a classicist, then maybe you could read it. That was the huge worldview shift, I think, about these characters that Joseph Smith was bringing forth and translating for the Book of Mormon. But the main thing is, yeah, I think this is where he got those characters from. The ancient scripts, he got them from the Adam Clarke commentary, copied them out, or some other commentary. This one, he obviously had it. He used it. We've got scholarship that shows that. And so what better candidate than this to get the foreign ancient languages to write down on the transcript, send it to this polymath like Charles Anthon, who looks at it and says, yeah, these look like real characters, but they don't make any sense. And it looks like whoever copied them down had a book open in front of him.
Yep. Yes. By the way, polymath for the folks out there is somebody who knows a little bit about a lot of things and sort of puts it together, if I'm not mistaken.
Is it? I didn't mean it that way.
An individual whose knowledge spans many different subjects, known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems.
Okay, yeah, it's not a little bit about a lot of things. It's
A lot of things.
Yeah. So anyway,
which Adam Clarke would be.
Yeah, Adam Clarke was, and so was Charles Anthon, and so was Samuel Mitchell.
Yeah. Takes one to know one. It wasn't Joseph Smith, and it sure as hell wasn't Martin Harris.
No.
All right, I just want to note, we'll take the phone calls here, but I just want to note, Michelle Murray, thank you very much.
Michelle, thank you.
Kenny B, thank you very much.
Kenny B.
Charles Jones, thank you.
Give me that clarinet.
And Diamond Dave, thank you very much. Folks, please like and subscribe.
Hang on.
What's that, RFM?
Nothing, I'll look it up myself.
Let's go to the phone line. I do have one call in. If anybody else wants to come in, we'll be happy to take our standard 3, but we do have one. So, Eric, are you there on the line?
Oh my gosh, yes, I am.
Hi.
What do you think? What do you think about Charles Anthon in the Charactors?
Okay, I know we easily dismiss, or overlook the idea that Joseph Smith was playing the role of Harris. This is just a joke to get us started. But the idea that he did that is hilarious because he easily convinced Anthon that he was a dupe. What was the expression earlier? It was hilarious. Anyway, I just think it's really funny. But who knows? Who the heck knows? But what I am really strongly feeling about this right now is like how many scholars have to be disrespected or insulted by Mormons? You know, we've got Anthon and Mitchell.
Robert Rittner.
We've got the Robert Rittner. He's on my list. The whole Smithsonian letter, right? Like, no.
Yeah.
That's
Michael Coe.
Yeah.
John Lundwall.
And Adam Clarke for being ripped off for a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah. I don't know how many people would be in this entire list, but yeah, it's just bonkers.
It's a crazy story. This story alone would twist a believing Mormon in knots, and they wouldn't be able to get out of the predicament of trying to answer the contradictions in the Charles Anthon event.
You can't get out of it as a Mormon. I just got to keep stressing that because the Book of Mormon says no one knows our language. He could never have verified any translation from any Book of Mormon characters.
And we have the characters from the Whitmer document, and nobody can decipher them.
Yeah. Like you said, he would have deliberately had to put characters and not sentences. He wasn't capable of that.
Right. And that's why nobody can translate this gibberish into sentences to the present day, except for a few crackpots. My apologies to the crackpots in the audience.
I don't have the exact quote because it went by real quick, but after Anthon was dealing with Harris, he left him astonished at his simplicity, and we all believe that. That sounds exactly like Harris.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was fooled, huh?
And honestly, I was talking with Bill earlier today, and I thought, this Martin Harris is known as the guy who's always coming up with the tests, the brilliant, cunning tests for Joseph Smith to prove his prophetic ability, like swapping out the stone and seeing if he notices the difference. It never apparently occurs to Martin Harris that Joseph Smith would be capable of telling the difference between this freaking stone that Martin Harris pulls up down on the river, and swaps it out for Joseph Smith's precious seer stone that he's had with him for, I think, years as of that point. I expect he knows it like the back of his hand. And here comes Martin Harris, whom the hurdy, and slipping in a fake. And here's Joseph Smith going, okay, I know what Martin Harris did, but more importantly than that, I can use this. This is the brilliance of Joseph Smith. I can use this now to impress him with my prophetic ability. And I look down. I don't say, hey, you think this is going to fool me, Martin? That doesn't do anything. You put it in the hat. You put your face over the hat and you go, what's going on? Martin, I can't see anything. All is as black as Egypt. Martin, what's going on? And Martin goes, oh, he's real. Martin. I mean, he goes, Joseph, here's your stone. I just swapped it out. That's why you couldn't see. Martin Harris has eaten this stuff up.
Meanwhile, Smith looks in the hat and goes, that ain't my fucking rock.
No, I know. It is not my dog. And it's not my rock either. And Martin Harris is eating this up like, popcorn shrimp. He will buy anything. And so now he comes to Joseph Smith and he says, Joseph, I want to take these characters to New York. Why? Because it's the same thing. I am mortgaging my house. I've got a wife she's revolting. Take that how you will. And I've got to prove this. I have to get some evidence. So now Joseph Smith goes, crap, this is my money ticket. He's doing it again. I can't talk him out of it. What am I going to do? What am I going to do now to keep Martin Harris on the gravy train? And what will I send with him? And what will I write down on that piece of paper in order to convince him?
What if I give you a box, Martin? What if I give you a box? It's locked. There's things in it. Don't look inside. You die instantly if you do, but hold on to the box. If things go awry, you'll have a locked box.
That part just seems too incredible to believe.
I know. That's what I thought about Dear Jesus too.
Oh, I love Dear Jesus.
And the monkey in the box. That sounds pretty incredible. Everything about Mormonism is incredible. And the earlier you go into the earlier manuscripts, the more incredible it becomes until they put this layer of civility over it.
Well, with this discovery about Adam Clarke in the Book of Mormon and the discussion from last time, you could see how many little evidences that hint at he just tweaks things as he goes. Because you've got, you can't even touch the place because God will smite you. And then he comes up with other reasons why you can't translate. It's just riddled with all of these adjustments in how he is dealing with his current situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I've said it before, the Book of Mormon reads not so much like a history. It doesn't read at all like a history. It doesn't read so much like a pretended history as much as it reads like a book that is actually alive and it's responding to its environment. And the things that are going on in Joseph's life end up getting manifested in the Book of Mormon text, cast as history, but addressing all the problems that Joseph Smith has going on. 3 witnesses. Here you go. You should have 3 witnesses. Here's the Book of Mormon talking about this. Everything.
So much so that the apologists have to say that that's inspired. It's ridiculous.
Right, because obviously Moroni saw our day, so he wrote the Book of Mormon in order to answer all the questions of our day. That makes sense. Okay, that we can understand. The problem is that the answers to the questions show up in the history of the Nephites. If you just wrote saying these are the questions and these are the answers, and God has given me this inspiration to give it to you all these thousands of years in advance, that's one thing. But to take those answers and put them in the history of the Nephites, that's the problem, I think.
Yeah, and if we have the closer you're able to look at it, the more details you have about when he was writing it, the more apparent it is that he's doing that.
Yeah, the other
Yeah.
things he's working on at the same time frame often explains what concepts are being used. So, for instance, when Emma and Joseph lose their child to death,
Mhm.
it's at that moment that there is this part in the Book of Mormon about little children and being saved in heaven. And when you understand the context of when things are being written, you can understand why Joseph is inserting certain thematic material into his translation productions.
Why it's on his mind. Exactly. And he takes his father's dream, he puts it in the Book of Mormon, but he puts it as a historical episode that happened to a historical figure, Lehi, and then seen again by a historical figure, his son Nephi. That's the problem. It's not history, obviously, even on its own terms.
Yeah. Thank you, caller. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
calling in. Take it easy, Eric.
Yep. Great to talk to you.
Bye-bye. All right. Chuck, let me change that so we can see you there, my friend. How are you?
Good. Sorry to keep crashing your party.
That's all right.
It's
What do you
okay.
think about tonight?
Are you in an institution?
Oh, yes. Sometimes they let me out, but
I don't
today
see anything on the walls. They're looking kind of padded from here. Where are you?
I'm just in the basement here,
I love what you've done with the place.
right?
Yes.
Helps clear the mind.
Do you have anything on the wall I can't see?
Well, yeah, I could turn you around and you can see all kinds of stuff, but
There's stuff on the wall, though?
yes,
Okay.
sometimes there's flies too on
I think I can sleep better now. Go ahead.
the wall. So your last point there, he's putting things into the Book of Mormon as they unfold in his life, right? He's reacting to his environment in a lot of ways, it seems like.
hmm
So talk to me more about what you're saying with you think he's putting in the part from Isaiah later. Isaiah 29 comes in 2 Nephi 27
Yes.
is where it gets dropped in there.
What I'm
That's
saying, yeah, what I'm saying is that he had years to get intimate with Adam Clarke's commentary. He doesn't come to the translation production. It doesn't seem anyway that he comes to the translation production half-assed, going like, "Oh, I think I'll use Adam here, and oh, I think I'll use Adam there." It seems like he has some intention behind what he's doing. So I'm suggesting that he had time to think about Adam Clarke's commentary, specifically the Isaiah chapters, since he's the one who chose to emphasize them, and that Isaiah 29 would have been something that he would have thought about long before he put it into the Book of Mormon as a framing in which he could utilize. Again, this is the treasure digger who's been deceiving people since the age of 13. When he sees Isaiah 29 and he sees the conversation around it by Clarke, and he sees it says a sealed book, and he's claiming to have gold plates, part of them which just so happened to be sealed. That part came long before the book was ever translated. Like the conversation about what those plates looked like would have been an ongoing conversation from the beginning. Hence, he is dealing with the sealed portion of a book long before he inserts Isaiah 29 into Nephi.
yeah. So the storyline is this is happening. The Anthon thing is happening in February of 1828, if I got that month right.
Right.
Um, and then Harris works on the dictation a little bit longer. Then Oliver comes in, and we have Oliver by the spring when the
Actually, I
meeting.
think the 116 pages starts after the trip to New York, and that's in spring of 1828. And then there's the problem with 116 pages. And then there's the stuff that's taken away, right? So Joseph Smith can't translate anymore. Maybe he works a little bit on it through the winter. And then you come around, and then Oliver shows up, I think, in spring of 1829.
So
there's a
Anthon,
delay.
right? So Anthon, that incident has Anthon saying something along the lines of, "You're telling me a portion of it's sealed? Of course we can't read a sealed book." And then when Joseph gets to Isaiah 29, he's primed, ready to use it. It's a great scripture to utilize to build faith in people. This guy has been deceiving people. He's been deceiving grown ass adults from the age of 13 on. He's the earliest thing we have of him treasure digging is at 13 years old asking Sally Chase if he can borrow her seer stone in order to find his own. A year before the first vision, he is convincing and manipulating grown adults to look for Spanish bullion by digging into the ground, only to tell them it's sunk further away.
Chuck, I'm going to put this up on the stage. It was my last slide. It's already been talked about. But the interesting thing, hang on a second here. Let me go back up here. 2 Nephi 27, right? This is dictated in 1829. Martin Harris is still around and still going to be around for a long time. So
You've got to pay for it still, right? That's coming up in a year still.
I would presume that Martin Harris would read this and that Joseph Smith would know that he was going to read this. And therefore, he's going to give an account of Martin Harris going to see Charles Anthon that Martin Harris is going to agree with. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. By the way, Bill, I'm glad I have this opportunity to correct the record because earlier on, a number of episodes ago, I had answered prematurely. You had asked me if 2 Nephi 27 basically follows the Anthon account, and I had kind of said, yeah. Actually, it doesn't at all. It doesn't at all. If 2 Nephi 27 is the original Anthon account, okay, it's from 1829, all it says is that you've got Joseph Smith and he gives the words of the book to the dummy and the dummy goes to the learned, right? All the learned does in this entire account is say, bring hither the book and I will read them. That's it. There, I could stand to be corrected. I thought about this before the show went on. I grabbed my Book of Mormon and I thought, what does it actually say? Let me sit down with it and read it carefully. It appears that that's the only thing in the original Anthon account in 2 Nephi 27 that Anthon would say, bring hither the book and I will read them. The characters, right? He's got the words on the transcript, right? The piece of paper. Translate the words, and the learned shall say, bring hither the book and I will read them. That
Notice
alone. Yes.
Verse 17.
Yes.
The person who brought it says it's sealed.
Right. That's
then
Harris.
18, then 18. Then the learned shall say, I cannot read it.
Yeah.
Anthon does say that. This is all gobbledygook. It looks like it has some familiarity with languages that, but the symbols are not, or don't make any comprehending sort of order of them. They're from various languages. I cannot read it.
According to this, and thank you for doing that because I didn't highlight that. According to what I call the original Anthon account, all Charles Anthon says is bring hither the book and I will read them, and I cannot read it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now here it's put is juxtaposed to the sealed. All I'm saying is this, all right? It would need to, okay. I already talked about number one. When Joseph Smith is recapitulating Isaiah 29 in 2 Nephi 27 to revamp that verse, that passage from the Old Testament, to make it correspond to what happened more exactly, right? To what happened with Martin Harris in New York, according to what Martin Harris told him. 2 Nephi 27 is very modest. When read without the overlay of the 1838 history, all 2 Nephi says is that the learned person said was, bring the book and I will read them. That's all he says. And then apparently when Martin Harris says it's sealed, he says, well, I can't read them. Does he mean I can't read a sealed book, or I can't read these on the paper? It's ambiguous, isn't it? In 2 Nephi 27. Nothing more need have happened in the actual encounter between Harris and Anthon than that to support this recounting in Martin Harris's mind. What do you think, Chuck?
I like it. I think you're on this. I think this is what Townsend brings to us, right? He's snapped into place some pieces of the puzzle. Now we know kind of these outlier pieces that kind of go together.
Yeah.
We can slide them over and see if they connect now. So
I think this is the Ur text for the Anthon affair.
Yeah.
And you make a good point, RFM. Joseph Smith, in writing 2 Nephi 27, waters down Isaiah 29 to better fit what little happened in the Anthon episode.
Right. And I wouldn't even say waters down. I mean, he changes it. he changes the language substantially from what Isaiah has to say. And he goes on and on and on in multiple verses. It's like Isaiah's 2 verses and they're tiny verses. And Joseph Smith keeps going on. He's actually, what did you call it when he's talking involuntarily at this point? He can't stop talking about it. And he says the same thing over and over in several different ways.
When is
The main
this
thing is-
chapter translated, and when does Harris mortgage the farm?
Well, that's a good. When was what translated?
When was 2nd Nephi 27?
Spring of
It's going to be
29.
Yeah.
Toward the end.
And when
Maybe
does
June.
Harris mortgage the farm?
Okay. Well, let's see here.
well. They don't need Harris's money till 1830 to pay for it.
True. Thank you.
Um,
August 25th, 1829.
August 25th, 1829. And when was this translated?
This would have been translated by June of 1829.
So shortly after what Martin Harris would have seen this chapter and would have gone, oh my goodness, the thing that happened to me, it's in the scriptures. And a few months later, he mortgages the farm.
Yeah, the only thing that makes it sillier is I'm sure Joseph Smith told him he fulfilled Isaiah
Martin, you're not going to
before
believe
it was in the
You're
Book of
here.
Mormon.
Yeah, you're in here.
You know what I told you about how you fulfilled Isaiah, man? It's in the Book of Mormon too.
Give me a lockbox and I'm in.
is it more plausible, perhaps, though? Is it Mormon chapter 9? Is that where we
Yes.
find? Is it more plausible that maybe that's the initial entry point where he's saying, we're talking with Anthon, and he says he can't translate some of this. I don't know, and that's the initial injection point of this
Well, the
activity,
problem is that that's just earlier in the spring of 1829. It's
right?
still over a year later.
Well, I'm
That's the
still
problem with my theory, but I still think it's addressed to somebody for a reason.
yeah. I guess Metcalf kind of gives me some pause here sometimes, knowing where we are, because he's postulating that Moroni, maybe even Ether, aren't translated till after 2nd Nephi.
Hmm.
And so maybe we have more room as we come around the horn there on translation, where we can get to Mormon quicker. And in the spring, we're much
It's
closer.
possible, but no matter where you put it in the Book of Mormon translation period, it's still going to be over a year after Anthon.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to question here maybe, is how do we know February 1828 is the time? That's what we're told, but I guess I don't know the history well enough to know how we have February 1828 dialed in that this is when Anthon happens.
I guess
Maybe
it's just from the 1838 history. Is that the only place it's mentioned? Anthon didn't mention it, did he? He just said it was a long time ago. It was a while back. And
back then.
Yeah.
is when
why would
Anthon-
he remember?
Right.
All
So that-
Anthon has to do is go, I cannot read this. I can't read this. And then Joseph has enough to go on to
Right.
tie it to Isaiah 29.
It's a setup.
Yeah. And it's within just a few months of him mortgaging the farm.
And then if he says he can't read it, tell him about the sealed book. Oh, yeah. I think Joseph Smith was adept at many things, and some of them had to do with persuading people that he was right.
Yeah.
He finds those gaps nicely too.
Yeah. Anything else, Chuck?
No, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the time.
I'm glad that you called in.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
do.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, we've got we've got one more call.
Oh,
All right.
lordy.
This
Look
is
who's
it.
40. It's 2 hours and 53 minutes into this.
Sorry, my friend.
I can't believe there's somebody left to dial a phone.
Yeah, well, we've had 500 people watching live all night long, and they all stay till the end. So is this Dan? Dan the man.
Dan Vogel?
How are you?
Dan Vogel.
Okay, we're good for another 2 hours, folks. Settle in.
Dan, why do Mormons believe this story? It's got so many holes. It's like Swiss cheese.
Well, the reason why I called was to point out how the fulfillment of Isaiah changed between the original telling and the 1838 telling. So, in the 1828 telling, Anthon cannot read the characters. He cannot translate. And that's how Isaiah is fulfilled. Isaiah is fulfilled because the learner cannot read the book.
Right.
Right.
And that's second Nephi says, cannot read.
Yes.
And like RFM mentioned in Mormon, no other people know our language. Well, then you get to the 1838 history, and all of a sudden Anthon can read it and can verify Joseph Smith's translation as being accurate, more accurate than anything he's ever seen, which is a bunch of crap. Okay, so
It
now,
sounds a
how
lot
do you
like
fulfill Isaiah?
it sounds like Michael Chandler, doesn't it? It's the exact same language, isn't
Yes,
it?
exactly. Yeah, well, so what happened between those two events was Michael Chandler and the Egyptian papyri.
Right.
And Joe Smith manages to get from Michael Chandler an affidavit that says that Joseph Smith's translation, Joseph Smith evidently gave him a little specimen, and that the translation that Joseph Smith showed him was matched the learned back east that he had inquired about the meaning of the scrolls. So that Joseph Smith seems to be trying to make more evidence for his gift. So how is Isaiah fulfilled when now Anthon can read the characters? So as I read it, it sounds more like Joseph Smith is just awkwardly shoving the exact words into Anthon's mouth, and it doesn't really fit. It doesn't read smoothly. It doesn't make any sense that how can I read a sealed? Why would Anthon say, how can I read a sealed book? Why would Martin Harris say that part of it is sealed?
Dan, what do you think of my theory that the reason Joseph Smith wrote that in 1838 was like Isaiah's kind of gone out of his mind, but now he wants to prove that he's an accurate translator?
Yeah, right, because people are questioning his gift in 1838.
Yeah. I think you make a great point.
But anyway, so
the earlier account has him unable to read it, and then the retelling of Martin Harris's experience with him has him being able to read an unknown language of Reformed Egyptian.
Right. You don't fulfill Isaiah by reading it.
Exactly. So now in the 1838 account does read very awkwardly. It doesn't. It's not natural.
Dan, we've got you on the phone. So was Joseph Smith going off of a written statement written by Martin Harris about what happened with Anthon, or was he really just recollecting from 10 years prior what Martin had told him?
Right. I don't think there's there's no document that he was reading from. And I think he just made it up and put it in Martin Harris's mouth. He's not around. He's excommunicated. He's, back in Kirtland. But where the characters came from. Well, so the character document that we're looking at, that little slip of paper, is only a part of what used to be part of this Anthon. It's really not an Anthon transcript. It's a copy that Christian Whitmer made of the characters. There was other things on it. We don't have the other part, but someone took a photograph of it in the late 19th century, and it used to be like 3 times as big. The sheet of paper that those characters were attached to was bigger.
Can you look at the screen, Dan?
Rebel. Yeah.
Is that it?
Yes. Well, yes. So see the bottom part?
Yeah, where it says the Book of Moses.
The Book of Contradictions.
Yes.
Of Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a Christian, according to Brent Metcalf, that was he identified that as Christian Whitmer's handwriting, and the Whitmers weren't around in 1828. right?
Mhm.
So this is a photograph. We no longer have the bottom part that got detached somehow. And that Characters writing appears to be Christian Whitmer's also. So you can maybe assume that the Characters were written by Christian Whitmer, and maybe from some other specimen, maybe from the Anthon Transcript. He took the columns and made them this way, but maybe there's a bunch of different samples. We're assuming there's only one sample that was shown to Anthon. There could have been others. We don't know how this relates to what Anthon saw, and we shouldn't assume that
Right.
Hoffman got it right.
Right.
You know, yeah, they just put them horizontally instead of vertically.
Mhm.
That's all Hoffman's imagination.
Yeah.
So we don't know what Anthon saw.
Yeah, totally. All I
And
was trying to
where
do, all I was trying to do, Dan, was suggest to the audience, give them something to sort of in their mind be able to separate this document from the Anthon Transcript, because Hoffman, at the very least, was trying to create something that could be interpreted as the way Anthon described it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So on the matter of the curtain is only mentioned by Anthon and no one else. The curtain being between the Joseph Smith and the scribe, and that's because he's behind the curtain with the plate, supposedly, and copying the characters off the plates, and no one can see the plate. On all the other occasions, he's out in the open with the face in the hat. Harris only talks about the face in the talks about the face in the hat. You know, and that's all we can say is that that's the way it is. Now, a lot of people want to solve a lot of problems by putting, like maybe the Spaldingites want to put Joe Smith behind the curtain the whole time because that's the only way you can get them reading this manuscript. But that's the point that all the witnesses were trying to make, that Spalding can't be true because no, he's out in the open with his face in the hat. There's no manuscript that he's reading from.
But wouldn't that be their motive to put him out in the open, even though he was actually behind the curtain, in order to thwart that argument?
Well, I think Joseph did it that way anyway, so he might as well get the full effect by being in the open, because he isn't going to be reading from something behind the curtain because he's never read from anything before or since. You know, he gave his revelations out in the open. He didn't write anything. He wasn't a writer.
What about the Adam Clarke Bible commentary, Dan?
Okay, so I believe that there's no way that the translation was slowed down by him going methodically through the Adam Clarke commentary in front of everybody, or even behind a curtain. It would be too time consuming. So I believe that he probably studied this way before.
Yeah, that's the argument I've been making. He was intimately familiar with it.
Well, I think he just wrote things. He went through it and wrote it in his own Bible. Then he brought the Bible out because we know he's reading from the Bible, and his Bible's got markings on it, and he's following that from his study of Adam Clarke. He probably went through it pretty methodically, but pinpointed some areas and maybe even did a little inspired version of his own.
He was the first to mark his scriptures. He was the first to mark his scriptures.
Yeah.
Well, I did the same kind of thing. This is why it appeals to me, because I did the same kind of thing when I was teaching gospel doctrine class. People got mad at me for bringing in all these outside sources. So instead, I would just take the gospel doctrine teacher's manual and I would write in them all my sources and notes and references. And then I would just hold up the damn manual and read off my references as if they were there.
Yeah.
So in other words, taking something from another source, putting it in an acceptable source, but then reading it out of the manual as if it's in the manual when it's not really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I think he did. Probably the most likely thing to me would be the easiest way. I don't see him whipping out Adam Clarke's commentary and reading it and studying it, and that would slow the whole process down.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's probably pretty ponderous, don't you think, the process? Especially when you get to Isaiah and you're reading through Isaiah and here's 10 or 15 words, and now you got to wait for Oliver to scribble them down and keep sticking his quill back in the ink and then read it back to you, and then you've got to confirm it. I mean, what else are you going to do with all that extra time? You got to look at the footnotes.
Well, okay. So the average would be about 2 hours a day.
But out of the total amount of time, Dan, I know you've given this a lot of thought and study. Out of the total amount of time of dictation, what percentage is Joseph Smith actually talking?
No, well, what do you? I don't know what you're talking about. 2
Well, he has to
hours.
read 15 to 20 words or so, according to Royal Scouts, and he thinks it went in blocks of like 15 to 20 words. He's got to read them out. Then Oliver has to write them down. Obviously, he would start before he'd finished, but Oliver has to write them down. Then Oliver has to read them back to him, and Joseph Smith has to confirm that that's the correct translation before Joseph Smith begins translating the next section of script. And I was wondering, out of all that, about what percentage of the time is Joseph Smith actually talking, and how much of the time is he looking at the commentary in Adam Clarke?
Oh, back and forth. Yeah, I think it would be unwieldy, but
it would help with the Isaiah chapters.
Okay, is it fair to say Joseph Smith was talking less than 50% of the time?
That would be too.
It takes less time to write, to say something than it does to write it. You would think less than 50%.
It has to be read back. So the reading back should be about the same as Joseph Smith, plus there's the finishing, the writing down. So I would think that Joseph Smith is talking less than 50% of the total translation time. Does that make sense, Dan?
Yeah, I understand what you're going for.
Yeah. It's either that or he's got to look out the window at the clouds rolling by. He's got so much time to think, doesn't he, Dan? Whatever he's doing, he's got so much time in there to think.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so it's not like 2 hours straight.
Oh no, there's times skipping the rocks at the stream and
over the day.
There's times apologizing to Emma because you're so pissed off inside that you can't do any translating.
And there's that time when they were skipping down the river and Joseph accidentally pegged Martin in the head with a rock. True story.
Trevor's mentioning Terry Gibbons. I don't know this Terry Gibbons.
I don't know, but there's a guy I'd like to peg in the head with a rock.
So, but the characters themselves on the Anthon transcript that we have, that we call the Anthon transcript, it's the Whitmer transcript. Some people call it the Whitmer transcript.
Christian.
The characters there, and you look in Adam Clarke, and there's a lot of Arabic in Adam Clarke and places like that, but most of it seems to be deformed English or the Roman letters that Anthon remarked about. And there's some that appear like magic characters from magic script, sort of like on the Holiness to the Lord. Parchment has those characters that have no meaning on the four sides of it, or the three sides.
But they're different characters than these, right?
Yeah, well, there's some that appear and that are similar. Who knows where they came from? I can't say this is where it came. Okay. All I can say is that they have a resemblance to each other in some of the magic books. Okay, but you can get all sorts of places. They are squiggly marks, but there is a pattern to them too, which some of my videos show that there's a repeated pattern here and there in this thing. So it's thought out, but it seems to be inspired by itself. Like it will write one character, Joe Smith or whoever it was, would write a character and then make it like a version, several versions of the same type of character or group of characters.
Like,
So there's a pattern to the whole thing. It's not all that random as it looks.
No,
Yeah,
look
like
at it. I've got it up on the screen, but you got the 3 crosses over here. So the Jesus is crucifixion. You're working with something that looks like pi. A 4,
see the
2
wheel?
yeah.
and there's a moon, by the
so
way.
you
Remember
see on the wheel-
remember what Anthon had said about
Yeah,
moons,
moon.
crescent moons, and stars.
And stars and natural crosses and flourishes. Well, see on the side right here, well, on the top too, there's 3 sides. It's the holiness to the Lord. It's right there. There's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters there, not counting the star in the corner. Those 7 characters, whatever they mean, they could be, 7 is a important number in magic, but so it's like a backward E. There's looks like 4 type characters: a moon character, backwards E, a sideways S, an I with 2 parentheses. So
No, wait. I thought those were parentheses before, Dan, but I think those are moons. I think there are 3 moons there.
Well, when you know that where these characters came from, it's actually one character
I thought it was trigonometry.
kind of split apart. Yeah. I wish I had a picture of where they came from. I found where they came from. Remember, I was on your show and I showed.
Yeah,
I
we talked
remember
about
you were on the show, but I can't remember where they came from. There's too much to remember that you know.
It was a different magic a publication. And what they did was use whatever kind of typesetting characters to stand in for what were probably other magic characters that they couldn't typeset.
Yes.
But so they had like.
Tim is saying the Magus, but I don't think it was that because I've got a copy of that and I don't remember us relating one to the other.
It wasn't the Magus.
Yeah, I didn't think it was.
It's been
Never listen to
a
Tim.
while.
And I notice, of course, again,
Anyway,
that
that
it's the
Hebrew
same thing it's written on 3 sides, left, top, and right.
Yeah,
It's
but
the
notice
exact
the
same thing.
Hebrew. So Anthon mentioned Hebrew. So there's Hebrew on the bottom.
The tetragrammaton 3 times.
Yeah, the tetragrammaton. So I think there's a lot of magic characters that aren't on this, but when you look through all the magic literature, there you can find some similarities. But the most similarity on the Anthon Transcript is deformed English. It's as simple as that. He made them up, and he invented them, and he kind of inspired himself as he went along, and at any rate, I don't think it was Clarke's commentary behind the curtain, because one of the easiest ways of getting, there were whole books that had every alphabet they knew in them. Just the entire book would have every alphabet imaginable, okay? And dictionaries at the time would have like a part of it. You know how like we have dictionaries today that would have like various tables, in the back, weights, measures, all that kind of stuff. Well, back then they had alphabet, and they had Chaldaic and, cuneiform and all of that stuff in that various alphabet. So if you just had that one page in your hat or whatever, so you would be behind the curtain anyway, writing out carefully, he said, carefully copying these characters from the plate. So instead of just, putting the paper on the plates and using a pencil to do a brass rubbing.
Frottage.
That would have been nice.
That would have been easier.
Anyway, so the curtain is mentioned by Harris to Anthon, and Anthon says, "Tell the guy behind the curtain,"
Hey, this is way before. This is way before the Wizard of Oz, right? Wizard of Oz written at the end of the 18th century or 19th century, excuse me.
Yeah,
late 1800s, I think, or is it early 1900s?
I'm just looking it up here to see in regards to the book. 1900 novel, 1900 Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Right on the 1900.
Yeah, 1900 Wonderful Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, so he's not. I'm just saying that he's not riffing on the Wizard of Oz when he's talking about the man behind the curtain.
By the way, Dan, there's actually two references in Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism, biography of its founders and history of its church, personal remembrances and historical collections hitherto unwritten by Pomeroy Tucker.
Yeah.
Pomeroy Tucker mentions the curtain twice.
Yeah.
But he would know, right?
Do you have the quote?
Yeah. So the first one is from Charles Anthon. It seems to match up really well with that. The second one is the work of translation. Something time has been, again, something is just some other word. I don't know what it is saying. Time has been done in the recess of dark artificial cave, which Smith had caused to be dug in the east side of the forest hill near his residence, November.
The Miner's Cave.
At least such one account given out by the Mormon fraternity, though another version was that the prophet continued to pursue his former mode of translating behind the curtain at his house and only went into the cave to pay his spiritual devotions and seek the continued favor of divine wisdom.
Right, there's a second one. He doesn't say how he knows it.
So they have, translating being done in Palmyra, which we know didn't happen. He could have done did a display of some kind before he left for Harmony. It's always possible. But the actual translation in earnest began in Harmony, Pennsylvania. And that February date you guys were talking about. So he left Palmyra in December. And then Harris came down there in February and went to Anthon. And then they started translating when he got back from Anthon. And from February to April, I think it was June when the baby died, is when he left just before the birth.
Right.
That was Harris. And then that's 116 pages. And Harris all of his descriptions are the stone in the hat. And that's 116 pages.
Yeah. I just want to say, by the way, Tim Rathbone, finish your thoughts. I'm so sorry. Finish your thought, Dan.
So everybody gets confused because of Emma saying that the Nephite interpreters were used until the loss of the 116 pages, and then after that, it was the stone. But it was the stone all along, because all of her descriptions are the head and the hat too.
Well, of course, the other thing is, Dan, and I know we've talked about this.
Probably.
The other thing is, of course, that Martin Harris's story about trying to fool Joseph Smith by swapping out a stone at the river makes no sense with spectacles.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and Harris getting his hands on the stone to look at it and switch it.
Mm-hmm.
If you
So
can
so Harris is not the smartest tool in this.
no,
the
he's
sharpest
obviously
tool in the shed.
yeah, he's less cunning and
He
intelligent
thinks he's clever.
yeah. He's easy
He
to
thinks
fool.
he's clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's how Joseph Smith fooled him, because he thought he was so clever.
Yes, you're right. He's the Jacob Hansen of early Mormonism.
Can you see your screen, Dan? Tim sent this, and I don't know, I don't know what we're looking at necessarily, but it looks like where maybe some of the symbols came from.
Probably focused on that. Oh, the Book of Mormon character in the left bottom, second to the bottom, probably, or several of them.
Yeah.
So these are matches, probably from Hoyas, right? Tim Hoyas, the Hoyas. Yeah, you can find magic characters that there's broad similarity between these magic characters.
Yeah.
So Joseph Smith is just pulling this out of his mind from various places, shapes and things.
It's not like he's
our magic.
It's not like Joseph Smith is not a guy who spent years engaged in treasure digging with magic symbols and parchments, written on parchment as well as on the ground.
From the age of 13.
Yeah. Right. So, and this is his world. This is where if you were to make up characters, where would you draw from? And that's why you look at the transcript, and Anthon knew it was a bunk.
Yeah.
But Joseph Smith knew that too before Harris even left.
Mm-hmm. Do you think,
So
Dan, do you think Joseph Smith was nervous waiting for Harris to come back and find out what happened?
No.
Why not?
I think he knew what was going to happen before Harris even left. And Harris came back, and this is a statement by John Gilbert, the typesetter of the Book of Mormon,
Mm-hmm.
said that Harris came home after visiting with Anthon, believing that Joseph Smith was a little smarter than Anthon. So, to Harris, the proof was that Joseph Smith could translate it and they couldn't. That's how
Right.
smart it was.
That's Isaiah. Exactly.
That proved that Joseph Smith had a gift.
Because he could translate it and the learned could not.
Right.
What could be more obvious?
That was
And Joseph Smith would definitely know that nobody could
Right.
translate it since he pulled those characters out of his ass.
right. And so for Harris, he just wanted to hear Anthon say, well, they kind of look like this or that,
Mhm.
various kinds of characters. If Anthon did say anything like, it looked like he had copied it, he had a book before him and just copied it from a book.
Yeah.
That implies that some of the characters resembled some real characters, whatever it was. We don't have what Anthon was looking at. And that circle, I think, is a magic seal, not the Mexican zodiac. The zodiac's pretty close to what that holiness to the Lord thing.
Well, we see something that's a
looks like,
circle
yeah.
and we interpret it based upon our background. And maybe Charles Anthon was more acquainted with the classics than with the occult.
You're right, though, Dan. I mean, this circle you're saying would be sort of in that neighborhood.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a seal. There's all sorts of seals. Yeah, those seals there, you can see those circles.
Yeah.
The wheels, I call them wheels, with spokes.
Well,
and magic seals. Those are magic seals.
and what Anthon said was it was circular. It was like the zodiac calendar, but it was divided up into compartments.
Right. Well, so somebody else said, I forget what book it comes out of. Could be Orson S. Turner, 1852. But the one person said it was a concentric circles within circles, and it was from the title page of the Book of Mormon, or the plate.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a zodiac. That
circles and circles, so you can see you can see a circle inside a circle, and then
that one's got to be modern, because that also has the Greek images around the outside circumference of that particular one. Didn't look Mexican on the outside.
let me just try to find.
There's one.
There's a more modern thing
below that.
Here, let me take this one and see if this works.
Humboldt. There we go. That's looking a little more.
Yeah, Humboldt. Zodiac.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, but you're in it's all magic. Anyway, so
It's all
he
magic.
could be confused by so Anthon related it to what he knew.
Right.
Right? He didn't probably know magic seals all that well, and talismans, So, but I think that why the circle? Well, if the person was right that I just quoted, that it was concentric circles and that it came from the title page, it could be the seal that protected the plate.
I love it. Well, thank you, Dan.
You bet.
Anything else? Otherwise, I'll let you go. But I always appreciate what you add to our shows. It's nice to have the scholar in the chat who can correct things at times, sort of add things or put us on the right path if we're off at all. So love it.
It's best when you tell us how good we are.
Yeah, it's the best when you do that.
And the other thing about Dan Vogel is it's almost midnight where he is. Isn't it almost midnight?
Yes. Sometimes, I doze off.
He lives in Ohio, where I'm from.
Yeah, he's in Ohio. That's Eastern time, I believe.
Eastern time, 2 hours ahead. It is 11:47 there. Almost midnight.
That's right.
And something evil's lurking in the dark.
Yeah, the show was great. The show was good tonight. I loved it.
Good.
Thank you so much. Praise from Caesar.
Well, thank you, my friend.
You bet.
Have a great night.
Oh,
thanks, Dan.
And by the way,
yes,
it won't be long before I'm back.
Right, next week we got a gig scheduled. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Do you want to announce it right now, and then you could just take us out? Just lead us out of here.
Lead you out of here.
Yeah. Tell the audience.
I tell you what. I will. I'll do it, Dan. That wasn't fair of me. I apologize.
You do.
Dan, thank you. We'll see you next week, and I'll tell everybody what it is. The thing is this: these polygamy deniers. Okay, there is like an
monogamy affirmers. RFM monogamy affirmers.
Never, not in a million years. Never calling them that. The thing is that there's an effort afoot, mostly on their part, but now supported by others, to give them some kind of legitimacy in the world of scholarship when they have none. Okay. And so what we're having Dan Vogel on is to talk about 3 or 4 instances, the things that you need to know to understand why you should give these people no credibility whatsoever, because they are completely off their rockers. Okay. There are certain things out here, they might know about, but when you know about the foundation and the arguments they're making, you will say, keep me as far away from these people as possible. Don't you agree, Dan?
Yes. I'm working through some of their stuff. I have 5 short videos.
I've watched them all.
Responding to some of their arguments, and I'm continually going through. There's so many. They have so many videos, and they act like I know what they all are, and so I'm targeting weaker people or something. I just listen to the videos I'm interested in, and then if I find something that is sloppy, then I make a short video and let everybody else know about the poor scholarship that is coming out of their group.
Yes, and the reason I called you several weeks ago and said, please, please, please come on, we want to talk about this, was because I was watching one of your short videos, and it was the one about the Kinderhook plate and them trying to get around William Clayton's Gap Journal and say that it was made up later. And it was absolutely, there could not be a better proof in the world that it was not made up later, that it is authentic, that it was produced at that time, and that Joseph Smith sure as hell was practicing polygamy. That's what it talks about, which is why they can't have it be authentic, right? And yet there's a smoking gun right in the middle of that journal that proves without question that it was written at that time. And that's one of them. That's just one of the things we'll talk about, right, Dan?
Sounds fun.
Right. So I look forward to that. I have to get busy and kind of prepare it.
Especially since I built it up so much.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dan. So
Anyway.
yeah.
Dan, thank you. You're wonderful.
Take it easy. Have a great night.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye, Dan.
Folks, if I can just say here before we end the show, 497. You guys stayed the whole way. Kudos to every one of you.
Bless you.
Appreciate every one of you as followers, listeners, fans of the show. RFM and I really enjoy this work that we do in helping to shine a light on Mormon history, current events, and other things going on within Mormonism. And if you want to support the show, we really could utilize that support. Please visit mormonismlive.org. Click the donate button. Please give us the thumbs up on the YouTube there. Hit the subscribe. Don't hesitate to hit the notification bell. And we will see all of you Friday for Mormonism After Dark, and next Monday for the newscast, and then Wednesday at 6:20 p.m. With Dan Vogel to go into these discussions on polygamy. So thank you, everybody, and have a great night. Hope you enjoyed the show.